We're back with another episode of the Room for Nuance podcast. I'm here with my special guest, Brett McCracken. Hi, Brett.
Hey, Sean.
Will you open us in prayer and ask the Lord to guide our speech so that it'll be edifying for everyone who is tuning in?
Yeah, for sure. Lord, thank you for Sean and this podcast and the chance to have a conversation with him today. And we just pray that what we discuss and where this conversation goes would be edifying for listeners, that it would give you glory, and that it would advance your mission in the world. We pray all this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Well, brother, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you came to know the Lord.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest. I'm a Bible Belt born and raised kid. I live in California now. I've lived there for 20 years, but consider myself a Midwesterner, Kansas City, born in Oklahoma, raised in Kansas City. So Chiefs fan, Royals fan, which is
And that's
fun.
Football?
Chiefs is football.
Football, Royals
is baseball.
Baseball.
Yes. So in terms of my testimony, I'm one of these kind of boring, but it's glorious. You know, I don't think there's any boring testimonies in God's economy. I went to church from, a week old, and then every week growing up, my dad was a deacon in a Baptist church. We were very involved, went to church Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening. It was that type of like all-in kind of church family. And I think some people who grew up in that situation maybe rebel against that and kind of stray away from that. And I never did, by God's grace. So church has always been something dear to me, something that I absolutely love and cherish. And there's been seasons in my life where it's, been frustrating for various reasons, but it's been something that only by God's grace can that love be something that is within me. So I remember a moment when I was about 5 where, I prayed the sinner's prayer and kind of, I think I remember being in Sunday school and having my Sunday school teacher like explain with flannel graph, like the gospel. And it was simple enough to a young child that I just decided, okay, I'm going to pray this prayer and make this kind of official. But then it wasn't until 5-ish years later where I got baptized. And I feel like I pinpoint that as like the moment where my salvation became real to me, in the sense of like, I want people to know that I'm a Christian, and I want the community to kind of formally recognize this. And I remember being a 10-year-old and really wrestling with the kind of going forward of the invitation, for that whole like singing Just As I Am moment at the end of a service. And you go forward if you want to make a decision. And I think for like a year, I was like, with fear and trembling, like, should I do this? Should I need to be baptized? I want to be baptized, but I'm nervous. And eventually I went forward and I got baptized. And I feel like that's when my faith really kind of kicked into gear in a real sense. And so my testimony from there has basically been just continuing to love the church, be very involved with the church. Went to public school through high school, but then I went to Wheaton College, great Christian college. It's got some issues, like any Christian college these days, but I had a great experience, and it was
Did you see the thing that just released yesterday about Wheaton?
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
You don't have to talk about that. I just was...
there's a lot to talk about there, but I also worked at a Christian college for 9 years, Biola University, so kind of the dynamics and the challenges of Christian higher education are a real thing, and I've seen it firsthand. I saw it when I was a student. I saw it as a staff member. But from my experience in the early 2000s going to Wheaton, it was kind of a time when my faith became my own in an intellectual way. Because I was like a kid. I was like the nerdy intellectual kid, in youth group who was always asking the hard questions of the youth pastor and trying to bring up gotcha theological issues. I never like deconstructed my faith or went that route, but I was always a little bit of a prickly, kind of like too smart for his own good kid. And I think that going into my college years, that demeanor and that posture could have gone one way or the other. I could have kind of gone and kind of I don't need faith, faith and the intellectual life don't really cohere. And I think for a lot of young people, that is sadly, that's the choice that they feel like they have to make, right? The life of the mind or the life of faith. And that's unfortunate. And it's kind of, Mark Knoll called it the scandal of the evangelical mind, is there really isn't one to speak of. But at Wheaton, I caught a vision for how those two things could be brought together. And you could be like a rigorous thinker and a curious thinker, someone who explores the whole realm of creation, the liberal arts. I was really interested in the arts, literature, humanities, history, all of that. And you could do it from like a robustly Christian point of view. And so that was huge for me because I think it solidified my faith as something that I didn't have to abandon or check at the door in order to be a rigorous thinker and a curious thinker. So, and ever since I've been a writer and a journalist, film critic. So exploring culture critically, but from a Christian perspective. So,
and you do that now for whom? The Gospel Coalition.
The Gospel Coalition, yeah. So I started writing about film and arts and culture at Wheaton when I was a student, like for the student newspaper. And that kind of got me started in this kind of vocational path. And then I started writing freelance film reviews for Christianity Today and then Relevant magazine, if you're familiar with Relevant.
Yeah, are they still going?
They are still going, I think. Yeah, but
must not be that relevant if I'm not, if I
they
can't
were
remember.
when they got started back in like the early 2000s. It was right when I was getting started, so they needed writers, and it was a convenient thing. But then I started writing for TGC freelance occasionally, and I became kind of a go-to writer for TGC. Alex Duke was my editor, if you know Alex. Yeah. He was overseeing the arts and culture section at the time. And I would write a lot of film reviews and things for TGC. And I guess I just kind of became enough of a trustworthy writer and voice that they offered me a job eventually in 2017. And so I've been working full-time with TGC since then. And I'm a senior editor, so I oversee arts and culture content, but I do other stuff too. So articles of other topic genres, I get writers to write on those, and I write myself. I write on more than just movies and pop culture. I write about the church and cultural trends and things like that. And it's super fun, and I love it.
Okay, so this is going to be a weird interview. This is like sometimes when I don't parse out a text correctly before I preach it, and I end up preaching two sermons in one. This interview is going to be like kind of two interviews in one, because I want to talk about your work at TGC, but we actually brought you here to talk about TGC's new book, Scrolling Ourselves to Death. Yeah. So let's continue in the Brett McCracken TGC stuff, and then we'll dive into the scrolling stuff later.
Cool.
So I think in a certain corner of like evangelicalism, they view kind of your job as fluff. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like, oh, so you're going to find the gospel in Avengers Endgame, like, who's the Christ figure? Tony Stark. Mm-hmm. What kind of criticism do you hear about the kinds of things that you do? What kind of criticism do you hear on a regular basis?
A lot. I mean, there's criticism from every angle and every perspective. I think on one hand, people really don't like the kind of gospel and Tony Stark approach, in which I don't like that either. And I'm not interested in publishing articles at TGC that are like reading pop culture on that superficial level of like, let's make an Avengers movie a gospel-y thing, I'm not interested in that. I think that's overdone and kind of insipid. Then you have the whole kind of camp that just views pop culture as morally corrosive, and it taints you to even touch it, right? So even if there were a heavily theological movie or TV show, let's say Severance, which we were just talking about, I think Severance is full of religious and theological ideas, but it's like a TV MA show, right? With a lot of cuss words and various like objectionable content. So there's some Christians out there who just don't even think it's viable for Christians to engage critically with that sort of thing, because to go there is a compromise. And then I think there's some, in my experience, there's some Christians who just don't feel like it's worth our time to, like, the mission is preach the gospel, be involved with church ministry. So pop culture feels like a separate category, right? It feels like a sideshow. It's just a waste of time. And the idea of expending any energy thinking about it as a Christian it's like we compartmentalize it, right? It's like our Sunday life. And even though most people in your churches are watching Severance and are going to Marvel movies and are watching HBO shows and et cetera, there's some people who feel like we don't need to talk about that and what you do on your Netflix account and what you do in your lives with pop culture, with the music you listen to, the movies you watch, TV. We just don't need to those paths don't need to intersect. So those are some of the criticisms that we get. And I will say over the years, like I feel like I've heard those criticisms and internalized them to the point where I get it. And I don't want to err on the extremes that those criticisms are getting at. I don't want to make pop culture more important than it ought to be in the hierarchy of the Christian life. It isn't the most important thing. It isn't the main thing. And I don't want to ever make it feel like that. I don't want to err on the side of like reading Jesus into a pop culture movie narrative where it would be a stretch, you know. I don't want to put more of a kind of cringy taint on it than it deserves. So the way that I have approached it, I think, has matured over time, and I really take a cultural apologetics approach. If you're familiar with that term, cultural apologetics, kind of the Tim Keller school of, culture is a place where the spiritual dynamics of our time, in let's say in Western American culture, 2025, pop culture is where we see the expressions of longings, fears, anxieties, questions. It's an important venue for us to, as Christians, to at least be aware of and to attend to, because people are, even if they're not religious, they are spiritual and they're asking spiritual questions. They're trying to understand what it means to be human. They're trying to understand what meaning is. Where do you find meaning? What is purpose? What is the point of life? All of those questions are being asked constantly in pop culture. Almost every movie director, almost every TV show creator is exploring those questions in a semi-serious way. They are in it to make money, but they're also artists who are trying to like wrestle with things. And pop culture is where you can kind of take the pulse of our cultural moment. And that can be an opportunity not only for us to be informed missionaries in terms of how we talk to our neighbors and how we know kind of the pain points of our neighbor and how we kind of know at any given moment in time what are these spiritual connection points that I can have with this culture. But I think it's also just a practical kind of conversation starter where you can, it's a kind of a common vocabulary in our culture. Hey, did you watch the latest episode of Severance? Did you see that movie? That can be an easier starting point to a conversation about God than just kind of jumping right there, So yeah, I think I view culture as a viable realm from a mission point of view as Christians, from an cultural apologetics point of view, but also just from a beauty point of view, because I think that God created us as creators. He's a creative God. He's an artistic God. And as humans, we bear his image. And so human creation, even if it's not done with the intention of glorifying God, it nevertheless does glorify God when it's excellent, when it kind of accidentally expresses something good or true or beautiful. And I think as Christians, we should celebrate that. When there's something in the realm of culture, whether it's a, classical music piece like Howard Shore's soundtrack to Lord of the Rings, that just randomly popped into my head. Or phenomenal.
You got
yes.
Luke, he's hooked.
Yeah. Something beautiful in the music realm, or just a movie. Let's go back to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? That's like an epic expression of cinema at its absolute best.
You said best?
Best.
Oh.
Yeah. I think it's the best trilogy. So just on that level of like humans made in the image of a creator God doing their thing as image bearers, making something new out of the raw materials of creation. I think that's what art making is. It's kind of remixing from the raw materials of what God gave us. Art is just kind of reconstituting that in a new, meaningful, interesting way, right? I think it was Ken Myers who defined culture as what we make of the world in two senses, right? It's what we make of the world physically in terms of like taking the raw materials and making something, and it's what we make of the world in the sense making of it. Culture is trying to make sense of the world. To go back to what I was saying about like even secular filmmakers, secular TV show creators, they're trying to make sense of the world. They're creating culture to make sense of our what is it to be human? What is the point of life? You know, those questions. And so God created us this way. He wanted us to be doing this work, doing this culture making. It's part of it's the cultural mandate, right? Yeah. Bringing order out of chaos. And so for Christians to just kind of write that off and to say like culture, you know, pop culture, et cetera, is just kind of a sideshow. It's a distraction. It feels like it's being disrespectful to our creator, right? Who was intentional when he made us to be creative. And I think common grace is something that I think a lot about. Like God didn't just give Christians the capacity to be creative and to make meaningful culture. Everyone, just by having that common grace of the image of God, has the capacity to create something meaningful, something true and good and beautiful, even secular artists. And that's another criticism that you sometimes will get as a Christian doing the work that I'm doing is like, you're giving a positive review of a movie made by an atheist? Like, how could there be anything edifying in that? And I say, well, even an atheist, in spite of his or her atheism, can stumble across something true and can put their camera on the world that God made. And just by virtue of putting their camera, the attention of the lens on some corner of God's world, they're giving God glory, right? Because they're letting the audience see something beautiful for what it is. And sure, like artists will sometimes distort things and they'll kind of pervert the goodness of God's creation and kind of turn it more into a self-serving thing or something that's telling lies. And that happens a lot. And I think that gets at another aspect of what I do and what I think is important about what I do at the Gospel Coalition, which is calling out the bad in pop culture. So I would say,
you're not just looking for hidden gospel themes.
No, absolutely not. And I would say if you look at like the articles I've written at the Gospel Coalition over the years, and I would encourage critics out there who are skeptical of, you know, what I do to just look at the list of my articles that I've written. I would venture to guess that more than half of them are in some way like a critical analysis of something in pop culture that is off. Something that's popular maybe, but is advancing a narrative counter to the gospel. So for example, my review of Wicked, really popular movie. Everyone loves Wicked, right? It's just like, it was the highest grossing movie of the year. You know, I saw so many Christians, you know, on social media just like geeking out over it, loving it. Well, I wasn't familiar with the Wicked story. I hadn't ever seen the play. I knew vaguely, it's about like kind of a backstory of like the Wicked Witch of the West. So I went into it very open-minded, like I'll just see what this is. I saw a press screening and I just was horrified with how like bad this theology was. Like this whole worldview was very unhelpful from my point of view. So I wrote a critical review and I called it kind of the post-Christian morality of Wicked. And I talked about how like this is a post-Christian culture artifact because they're trying to retain some virtues of Christianity, but in a very subversive way, right? That's celebrating kind of just like gender ambiguity and queerness, and like, you know, the lead actress who was nominated for Best Actress is like a queer woman, and
who's now going to play Jesus Christ in the next production.
Of course she is. Of course. I wasn't surprised in the least by that headline. That's just where our culture is going, right? It's and I mean, this has been a trajectory for a long time. Like pop culture and the art world has been about transgression more than beauty for a long time.
Truman does a good job highlighting that in his excellent book,
The Rise and Triumph of Modern. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you go back probably about 100 years, the early 20th century is when this shift started happening, where art used to be about representing God's beautiful world. So what I was saying about like an artist just puts their camera on some aspect of God's world, that's a good thing. A painter gets their canvas out and goes to some beautiful field in the south of France, like Vincent van Gogh did, and paints it. And that is a God-glorifying thing because it's kind of remixing the existing beauty of God's world. Well, things started to shift away from representation. I think maybe artists got bored with that. Like, we don't want to just represent the world as it is. The world is meaningless. And, the world wars kind of shook everyone up in that regard. You can understand if you go through World War I, right? And millions of people die, and it's this kind of senseless event in the world. You can understand how people started to question meaning and like, what's the point of creating art that's just like a pretty picture of flowers that's representing flowers? So that's when art really shifted to being less about representation, like in the sense of representing the world as it is, and more about transgression, abstract expressionism, kind of more about just expressing yourself. To go back to Truman's book, things really did shift in a more express yourself direction. And that's where we're at today, where like something like Wicked is not really interested in the good, the true, and the beautiful as much as subverting our expectations, calling evil good and good evil, kind of blurring our moral categories. That's what art has become about. It's about blurring the lines, destabilizing foundations of truth, putting ugliness into our faces, and saying like, here, like drink this poison. You have to like it. I feel like that's so much of what Hollywood is giving us. It's like, drink this like poison, and it's art. And if you don't call it art, and if you don't agree that this is like art, then you're a Philistine. So yeah, I sound like a fundamentalist sometimes when I talk about this, but it's because it's true. There are dynamics in our culture that are very hostile to the gospel, hostile to Christianity, leading people astray. And I'm a parent of 3 young kids, so I'm now wearing that parent hat where I'm hyper vigilant with what they watch, because as we know, even Pixar movies, even Disney movies are full of really, really unhelpful ideas and messages. Some of my most read articles at the Gospel Coalition are like critical reviews of like the Buzz Lightyear movie or some other Disney movie, that's like, because parents care. And I think parents want a trustworthy Christian voice reviewing pop culture so that they can have some guidance. And I feel like that's a purpose that what I do offers for the church.
Bringing up the letting our children watch this and not watch that, there's an element here of wisdom, discernment, strengthening that goes into this discussion, right? Because it's very different if we're talking about a 6-year-old or a 16-year-old or a 36-year-old. How strong are they in their faith? Mm-hmm. What have they been through? Mm-hmm. So you may be able to watch Severance with a robust Christian worldview and do good worldview analysis and, see the good, see the bad. But your 16-year-old may not be able to do that, and they're being shaped and formed by it. So can you speak more about how Christians can like wisely engage with arts and culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a perennial question. I think for me, it's been a question that I've personally kind of wrestled with and grown a lot and matured a lot in. Just full disclosure, like when I was early in my career as a film critic in my early 20s, back when I was like a college student, I was like that sheltered evangelical kid who swung to the other extreme when I had the freedom to. And so I swung from maybe a more legalistic end to complete libertine, where I watched everything and there was no filter and almost nothing that I wouldn't watch. And that was wrong. And I have since come back to a more middle place where I feel like the pendulum swing is just not a good thing in the Christian life, and it happens all the time. not just
it's not good, but it's almost unavoidable.
It's almost unavoidable. I think humans are pendulum people by nature. We react and overreact. And in one of my books, Gray Matters, the subtitle is Navigating the Space Between Legalism and Liberty. So that book kind of came out of my own journey with this. So that, by way of preface, I'll just say, like, I have wrestled with this, and I think it's normal for Christians to kind of go through seasons of their life where they maybe err on one side or the other. And what I would say is, like, discernment is hard. Like, it's something that requires wisdom, and wisdom is hard. You don't just snap your fingers and become wise. You can't download a TED Talk and become wise by watching it. You cultivate it over time. And so I think hopefully the ideal is, as a Christian, the closer you are to God's truth and His Word, the more your life is shaped by God's Word, the more your life is shaped by His church, His community, the wiser you're becoming and the more discerning you're becoming. And so I think with pop culture discernment, a critical thing is just how steeped you are in God's Word. So you talked about, like, a new Christian, for example. I think if you're a new believer and you're not that well-versed in Scripture and it hasn't kind of shaped your life in a significant way yet, I would err on the side of caution with pop culture. I wouldn't watch things that you have any question about the potentially negative messages that are being advanced, but also the content, itself, and the explicit stuff, that you're just not mature enough as a believer. But even for mature believers, right, there needs to be limits around what you will subject yourself to. Not everything is beneficial, Paul said, right? It may be permissible, and we can debate all day Christian liberty and its kind of boundaries. But I think I would rather err on the side of avoiding something than indulging my curiosity and regretting it. And that's where I've grown as a critic. I think that these days there are more things that I just won't watch than ever before. And on one hand, you could say, well, you're older, you're wiser, you're that much more mature, so shouldn't you be able to watch more things and like be okay? And I would say, well, not necessarily, because the more shaped I am by Scripture and by a church community, the more alert I am to the dangers and the just unedifying nature of so much entertainment. So I'm a really bad film critic in some regards because, for example, like the current Best Picture nominees, there's at least 3 of them that I haven't seen. And it used to be unthinkable for me, like 10 years ago, to not have seen some of the Best Picture nominees. These are the films that, like, my colleagues in the film criticism community have pinpointed as the best movies of the year, supposedly. But I've just seen enough over the years where I'm like, this is what a Best Picture nominee is. This is sick. This is, like, grotesque. I'm not gonna. I know we've gone so far as a culture where we are in the whole, like, calling evil good, good evil, like, upside down nature of things. It's now the case that, like, you look at the Best Picture nominees for 2025 Oscars, and the majority of them are just, like, flat out, like, grotesque, immoral. I mean, there's movies celebrating prostitutes. There's movies. One of the movies is about a transgender drug lord, and there was a transgender Best Actress nominee. A man in the Best Actress category. Like, so that this is all of that to say, like, I'm not even watching all of the Best Picture movies because I just don't feel like it's worth it for me to expose myself to something for my own soul, even if there might be some ancillary benefit for me to kind of warn the church against something. Because that's a way that you could rationalize it in my shoes. I could be like, well, I'm a film critic that people pay attention to, and maybe there's some Christian out there who's waiting to hear what Brett McCracken says about Anora, a Best Picture nominee.
Which is the one that I was actually really excited about going to see. Mm-hmm. But I looked it up on Common Sense Media.
Yeah. Same.
And I thought, oh, this is just porn.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a movie, but like, I literally cannot watch this.
Right. Yeah. It's a movie about sex work, right? Prostitution. And it's supposed to be like an empathetic take and a humanizing that the least of these, which again, to talk about post-Christian morality, there's some vestige of Christian morality there in terms of Jesus went towards the sex workers,
prostitute,
right?
yeah.
But I think the difference is the medium, right? Like the Bible writes about Jesus befriending, Mary Magdalene and people who come out of kind of seedier backgrounds, but it doesn't depict it in kind of explicit ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important difference, right? So I could justify it by saying like, I'm going to see this movie and take one for the team and write a scathing review and warn people against it. But I've just learned over the years that that's not worth it. It's not worth it for me, and it can backfire with like people seeing, TGC is writing about this movie that has explicit content. What's he doing even watching that? Like, so I've learned that it's not a good thing and not worth it.
Yeah, that was one of the things that Doug Wilson said recently in response. Do you remember when they released that picture of Johnny Cash flipping the bird as part of their promotional material?
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of people were upset with him about that. I think rightly so. Because language is always a thing with the Moscow guys. And one of his responses was, well, Brett McCracken reviews movies at TGC that have the F word in it. Which I don't know if that critique quite holds weight, Yeah. Anyways.
We can talk about that separately, but I do think there's something different about like using it yourself versus writing about someone else using it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And even using it to promote ministerial purposes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, let's do our do you have a top 5 movie? Do you have your top 5?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah. Well, you're a movie critic. I thought maybe superlatives are hard. I know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a boring question for me because I'm such a fan of one filmmaker that like
who is
Terrence Malick.
Okay.
So my top 5 is almost always like some ordering of Terrence Malick films.
Yeah.
Like I would probably put The Tree of Life number 1.
Okay, you got to help me, brother. I've tried 3 times. I just can't do it, man.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Yeah, no.
Help me.
There's no shame in that. I totally get it. It's a movie that I delight in showing to first time viewers. Like I will every couple of years I'll like get a group together and like show it at my house, or like maybe there's like a special screening at a local theater. And invariably, some people just it doesn't do anything for them. They don't get it. It's too abstract. And some people, it's like the best film they've ever seen.
Do you like have a pitch though? Do you like try to frame it for them in advance to help them have some kind of structure through which they view it?
I mean, I say like it's about everything. It's a movie about the birth and death of the universe and everything in between.
Yeah. Pretty comprehensive. Yeah.
Pretty comprehensive. Yeah. But I say it's by a Christian filmmaker, Terrence Malick. He's a Christian. The title indicates this is a film that he's wrestling with theological material. And I think it's the best Christian film ever made. That's how I've
better than Fireproof.
Better than Fireproof even. Yeah.
Right.
It barely exceeds Fireproof's quality. Yeah. So I would say Tree of Life, maybe The Thin Red Line, another Terrence Malick film, number 2.
What's that one about?
It's a World War II epic.
Yes, I watched that.
Yeah.
It was very good. Long. Tedious.
It's long.
But very good.
Tedious. Sometimes the best things in life are tedious, Sean. Sometimes beauty is tedious. You just have to kind of give it your patient attention.
That's what I tell my wife when she doesn't want to look at me anymore.
Right. Beauty is tedious. Come
on, just take me in.
Another Terrence Malick film that I love is A Hidden Life. Have you heard of that one?
No, A Hidden Life is the one that I saw. Is that trying to escape the Nazis?
Yeah, the Nazi one.
Yeah.
It's also kind of a World War II period. Right. So The Thin Red Line, similar period, but it's about a true story of a Christian who kind of chose his faith over kind of Hitler. So
it was beautiful.
Beautiful, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That was, when I say it was tedious, there were certain scenes where I was like, I can't believe this scene is still going. But I also was thinking, I can't believe how much I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with Terrence Malick, you just have to go in to his movies like recognizing that this is not going to be a normal film going experience, and the pace is just very different. It's a more slow burn, kind of let it kind of just roll over you and don't try to make sense of it in the moment and experience it. So, okay, I'm going to throw in a non-Terrence Malick film just because it can get tedious to talk too much about.
You got 3 Terrence Malick. An ode to him is complete.
Master and Commander. Okay. Have you seen that? That is one of my favorite movies.
With Russell Crowe?
Russell Crowe and Paul Bettany. It's based on a beloved kind of novel about Lord Nelson and kind of the British kind of naval battles. Just a really classically made, beautiful epic. It's kind of like one of those old school type of movies they don't make anymore. Came out about 20 plus years ago, I think. So that's a great one. And then, what else would I put up there? Maybe like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, if that can count as like one film. I just think, again, kind of classic, epic film storytelling at its best, and everything about how Peter Jackson handled it. I shouldn't say everything. There's always some quibbles that you can take, but I think it holds up over time.
Luke says that the Hobbit series is better than the Lord of the Rings series.
That is objectively false. Sorry.
Isn't that what you said? You said, wow, this is where they hit their peak in film.
I know subjectivity plays into all this, but it is objectively not true that the Hobbit series is better than the Lord of the Rings films.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good top 5. You ready for mine?
I want to hear it, yeah.
There Will Be Blood.
Oh, yeah. That's a great one.
It's they say like the best books are the ones you can reread and you always get something more out of it. That's what There Will Be Blood is for me. Not only are you getting like Daniel Day-Lewis at his absolute best.
At his best, correct. Yeah.
The subtlety. Gosh, that sounds so pretentious. But there's a scene where he's on the beach with his brother and he realizes that his brother's not his brother. And there's just a glint in his eye, right? Where he's laughing, he's cutting up, he's joking, and then all of a sudden he's filled with all of the Daniel Plainview hatred that he's had throughout the entirety of the movie, and it's just a glint in his eye.
Yeah.
But it's everything.
Yep.
It's the story of like American religion. It's the two American gods, religion and capitalism competing against one another. But deeper than that, I think, is the story of a man who deeply wants to love, but is unable to love and be loved. He has this son that he finds and adopts, but he's got all these issues. He can't take care of him, can't have love.
Yeah.
He thinks he gets this brother. He takes his brother into his heart and then comes to find out he's being conned, And at the end of the movie, drink your milkshake. Okay, yes, classic, amazing acting, but it's really a man who is completely shriveled and dead because he has no love. And now that is a movie deeply resonant with gospel themes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But I just love everything about it. The cinematography, the essentially lack of a soundtrack.
Which I think Johnny Greenwood did the soundtrack from Radiohead. So it's a very
of course,
abstract kind of dissonant.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's more like pulsations than like anyway, so now that and There Will Be No Country for Old Men
came out the same year, I think.
They even had to shut down a day of production for No Country for Old Men.
Right. Yeah.
They were so close to one another when they did the oil fire scene.
Yeah.
It was ruining the shot. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading that. Yeah, that is a great movie, No Country for Old Men. That would probably be in my top 10 if I expanded my list.
Yeah. Jim Hamilton, professor at Southern, he recently convinced me, because he's sharp, man. He's not just a Bible guy. He's like a literature and story guy through and through. He's a bit of a Harry Potter nerd.
Okay.
He's trying to get me to get. Anyways, he actually convinced me recently. I used to say No Country for Old Men was like nihilism, pure packaged.
Yeah.
To quote The Big Lebowski, say what you want about the Nazis, man, but at least they had an ethos. But he actually convinced me that the movie is deeply moral, which I won't get into now because I'll probably ruin it.
Yeah.
So those are back and forth between 1 and 2.
Those are both masterpieces.
Yeah, it's close to perfect as I think a movie can be. And then my other ones kind of rotate through, man. So like Inglourious Bastards by Quentin Tarantino is really incredible.
Yeah.
Christoph Waltz alone.
Yes.
But it's like Brad Pitt at his best.
Yeah.
like his like comedy kitsch best.
Yeah.
I think it's Tarantino with some of his best writing.
For sure. I would put that up there as one of Tarantino's top 3 best films.
Yeah.
I really also like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Did you see that?
Yeah.
I love that. And I think there's some interesting theological ideas going on there.
Yeah. Give me an example.
I wrote about it for TGC, and my article was like all about the ending and how it's like a lot of Tarantino movies. It's kind of a revisionist history, and Inglourious Basterds the same way.
Yeah.
And I think what Tarantino is doing with these kind of reworked history endings is giving audiences kind of an eschatological picture of like, a more hopeful reality, like what might be. It's like this
where Sharon Tate doesn't die,
where the Manson murders don't happen, and where justice is served. And to go back,
albeit via a flamethrower, which maybe, a little picture of the end times.
Some people deserve flamethrowers. Let's be honest, like, right? We probably all deserve to be torched that way. But yeah, I think to go back to what I was saying about how pop culture is a place where like the spiritual longings of culture are expressed. One of the big spiritual dynamics in our secular culture, I think, is justice. Right? People are desperate for justice. We have not moved on from the need for good and evil to be weighed in the balances, and for some sort of judge to determine, right? The sheep and the goats need to be separated. Yeah. And so that is a movie that I think taps into that. Like, we all long for justice to be served and for these Manson murderers to actually be killed themselves, right? Yeah. And to not kind of kill these innocent people. And same thing with the ending of Inglourious Basterds. What a cathartic ending of a movie, right? Yeah. Like, we all dream of a universe where like Hitler and all the Nazis are like,
blown
destroyed,
up, set on fire,
blown up in that way. So these movies just tap into real human longings for justice that we as Christians can then say, well, we have a cosmic justice that will one day, be carried out by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And so that longing has a catharsis. It's not just a pie in the sky fantasy that you can only get in Tarantino movies.
Well, on that note of Tarantino movies, it's fascinating that these guys who always do the carrying out of justice are always these equally broken, morally dubious characters.
Yeah.
Which I guess we could talk more about that at some other point. So,
and that's a classic trope in movies, right? Like all the Westerns. If you think of classic Westerns, the one doing the justice is also very flawed, outlaw type person. So yeah,
which is really a picture of like Romans 13 sword bearing, right? The people who are carrying out the sword business right now are often quite as corrupt as the people that they're carrying the sword against. Yep. It's not until Jesus comes back, the perfect sword bearer is going to come and render perfect justice.
Totally. And I mean, man, do we see that in our cultural moment in terms of the critical theory, oppressor, oppressed, like power dynamics, and you have like the righteous oppressed minority that like thinks that they have the moral high ground.
Yeah, that's right.
But then when they get the power, they're just as broken and corrupt, and so the cycle repeats. Ad infinitum. So
now you just critique critical theory. I find that odd because TGC is woke.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. I'm very critical of critical theory, and this is an interesting topic because I went to a grad program for film studies at UCLA, and it was very steeped in critical theory, as you can imagine, right?
Of course.
Almost every grad program in the humanities in the West today is heavily steeped in critical theory. And
I have a buddy who got his master's in something related to literature.
Yeah.
And he said, I didn't even know you could study literature without doing it through the lens of critical theory. That's just all they do.
It's all they do. And so I went into that program thinking like, I want to be a film critic. I love movies. I love pop culture. And my love is motivated for a desire for the good, the true, and the beautiful. Like, I love being able to spot that in a movie and to kind of read a film and to kind of make observations about the cinematography that like shows how beautiful and intentional the artistry is. And so it was such a disappointment because I get into my grad program and that is not at all the approach that is taken. Like, there's no interest in analyzing culture on the level of beauty. because there's no way to define it. Beauty is totally subjective, and the idea of objective beauty is very passé in the academy and in the art world. So instead of reading culture on that level of like goodness, truth, and beauty, it's only reading it through the lens of critical theory. Power. How is this pop culture artifact, this movie, this TV show, an expression of the hegemony and the power that they want to kind of inflict through the narrative that they're giving? Or how is this movie an expression of an underrepresented minority voice who has been suppressed up until this point and now has a voice and a platform to tell a story? So I think there's some merit to kind of appreciating a film on that level, like who is being represented here, and maybe we haven't heard stories from this part of the world or this lived experience. So I don't want to knock that completely, but as a kind of
that's the only tool in your tool belt.
Yeah, as a way to look at things in a holistic way, it's a really, really kind of depressing approach, I think.
And it just does violence to art.
Yes.
Like if you only view art through this one lens, the problem with Marx is, for example, when he talks about alienation, is not the fact that he recognizes that there is alienation. It's that he doesn't go far enough in understanding alienation isn't merely economic. It's spiritual, it's relational. The same thing is true with interpreting art through the lens of critical theory. It's not that you don't recognize some true things sometimes, like power dynamics and all that stuff. It's that you just actually aren't seeing enough, and therefore you ruin the art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even the DEI approach, I've seen how in the arts it becomes a problem, because you start getting, there's this sense of like, if you're a white male, or if you're part of like a majority group, like your perspective is suspicious and not valued. But if you are a black queer woman from some sort of part of the global South that hasn't been represented often, like there's like an instant kind of elevation of the quality and this kind of like lifting up of like, this is art, you have to pay attention to it. But it's not on the merits of the work itself. It's just on the virtue of who's telling the story. And so that's where critical theory and kind of the DEI approach is not doing good things for the arts, right? And you can see this in countless museums across the West. You can see this in the art world generally. Just the quality is not, it's not great, because what's become more important than excellence and beauty is representation. And it's not to say that an underrepresented group isn't capable of something, a masterpiece. They absolutely are. But we should let the masterpiece emerge before we elevate it as such. Yes. We shouldn't just give kind of a de facto award to something just because it's something that hasn't come from that particular represented perspective often.
Yeah, amen. And it's actually to dishonor that underrepresented group.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we keep going down this pathway all day. But what's more important is that we go back to me talking about my favorite movies. Amen.
I want to finish your list.
Yes. So 4 and 5 are tricky. They could rotate on any given day. I think 4 is American History X.
Whoa. Provocative choice.
Tim Norton.
Spike Lee.
Edward Norton.
Is that a Spike Lee film? No, it's not. No. Okay.
But there was a big, actually, the director and Edward Norton had a big to-do afterwards. They were kind of at war.
Oh, I'm thinking of 25th Hour, which is a Spike Lee film that has Edward Norton. Yeah. That's why I got confused. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's Edward Norton at his best. His acting is insane. But the drama of redemption in that movie is so palpable and powerful. I could talk about it all day, but there's that one really tough curb stomping scene, which I get it. That might be really tough for people.
There's some hard stuff.
There's some hard stuff. There's a prison rape scene, but for people who don't know, I come from a world of drug dealers. I was incarcerated a lot as a teenager, so a lot of that I actually grew up in the earliest part of my life in Southern California. Yep. So when there's like skinheads in Long Beach. And people are like, what? I'm like, oh yeah, you didn't know that?
Yeah, you know that world.
The world, like going to school, getting chased by gang members. When I was in the 7th grade, a kid brought a gun to school and started to shoot. It was a big thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff really resonates with me. But the movie itself is also incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
For sure.
Number 5, it's back in. Go ahead.
Have you seen Sing Sing?
You know, that's on my to-do list.
Yeah, you
Is
have
it
to
good?
see Sing Sing.
Okay.
That's a film from 2024 that I wish had been nominated for Best Picture. I think it might have been nominated for screenplay or something, but it made my top 10 list. And it's just a super inspiring redemption story of like inmates in a prison who are part of like a rehabilitation through the arts program, and they do like Shakespearean plays, and it's just it's a story that shows real change from like, you know, hard convicts, you know, with a difficult past who actually have a future. You know, imagine that, a movie that shows change in a hopeful direction and not origin stories of villain movies, which is all the rage, where you see the devolution of a character to become the Joker or to become, you know, Cruella de Vil or to become, you know, the Wicked Witch of the West. Like, Hollywood is so interested in those stories of change, which are compelling to watch. Breaking Bad was a good, compelling TV show, but morally, it's not super inspiring and helpful to just kind of fixate on how our human nature goes in that direction of inertia and devolution. Yeah. Like, by the Spirit, we can be changed for the better. Yeah. And when you get glimpses of that in a movie, I think it's super valuable and something Christians should celebrate. Yeah. Even in a hard movie like Sing Sing, which is full of like prison language and you know, all of that. So, but I would recommend that to Christians any day of the week.
Nice. You've inspired me. I'll bump it up on my list of to-do.
Okay. Number 5.
Well, it goes back and forth. It's either Training Day, and you know, top 5 lists, you try to be objective. Some of this is just so personal. Yeah. I just loved that movie as a kid. I think it's one of the best cop movies of all time. And cop movies are some of my favorite genres of movie. It's one of my favorite genres. Denzel as Alonzo.
Oh my, that's man. Iconic role for him.
Oh, and you know, he improvised the King Kong ain't got nothing on me line.
I am not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, he went up to Antoine Fuqua after they hit cut, and he said, "I hope you got that, because I can't do it again."
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Ethan Hawke. Yeah. Phenomenal in that role, and the synergy between them. So it's either that or a movie you've probably never heard of. Although I don't know, you're a movie guy. Hard Candy.
Oh yeah, I've heard of it. I don't think I've seen it.
So it's with Ellen Page, right? Is that I always get
now Elliot
Page, yes, but Ellen Page.
Yeah.
If I even begin to tell you what is
Patrick Wilson?
Patrick Wilson, the guy who's been in 100 movies and yet no one
remembers.
Who he is.
I remember that actor. Yeah.
He's superb.
He's great. Yeah.
But it starts with him talking to Ellen Page in a chat room. He's an adult, she's a minor. And then if I tell you any more, I'll ruin the movie.
Okay, so Sean, that sounds very dark. Explain to listeners what about that film makes a Christian pastor love it so much.
Nah.
Come on, that's what we're talking about. This is the like heart of the matter. What is a value, redemptively for you in that?
Well, that's the thing though, is if I go to explain it, I'll actually ruin the movie. The big hit of the movie is actually finding out what's happening.
Okay.
Yes, but I will say it is deeply redemptive.
Okay.
It's also incredibly beautiful.
Okay. Which that is a value in its own right, as we talked about. Beautiful art. Yeah. Christians should appreciate that on its own
that's
merits.
Right. Yeah. And then I would say maybe another competitor is probably Armageddon with Bruce Willis.
Okay,
no,
are you being for real?
I
was going to give you the benefit of the doubt. From Hard Candy to Armageddon. Very eclectic tastes.
Yeah, so that's my top 5, man.
Yeah. Love it.
Or 6.
Those are great. Yeah.
5 or 6.
Training Day is also such a great film. And Denzel Washington, I think he plays a great villain. Did you see the Gladiator 2 with him?
Yeah, but I just cards on the table. I hated him.
You hated it.
Movie. I thought
you hated
he
him.
ruined the movie.
Really?
I thought it ruined the entire movie.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay, different readings of. I thought he was the best part. But
what?
Yes.
Oh snap! Okay.
I just thought every scene he was in was just so enjoyable to watch.
The thing about Denzel is he can never not play Denzel. Like, Daniel Day-Lewis completely, my left foot from one movie to, like what last
Abraham
movie he gets
Lincoln.
completely. Yeah. Denzel just plays Denzel. So to put him in Rome, to have like this slightly Brooklyn with a little bit of feminine accent. I don't know, man. It just didn't feel like it worked for me.
Right.
Yeah. But I really was actually overall encouraged by that movie at how much they were able to keep the thread from the first movie going and to have it feel actually really natural as a sequel.
Totally. That's another movie that kind of fits with the Tarantino alternate history, like hopeful ending. Yeah. Because the ending is, very counter to how history unfolded. Yeah. And I think audiences who went into it thinking that the Gladiator franchise is like more or less history were disappointed because it's,
Yeah, so ahistorical.
It's so ahistorical, but when something is that blaringly ahistorical, you have to understand that the director is doing something intentional. And Ridley Scott is, I think, trying to give audiences a glimpse of the fabled dream of Rome that the movie brings up so often, right? This kind of eschatological hope of a city of God where justice and equality truly reign. And there isn't this kind of oppressive regime, abusing the population. That is the dream of Rome that they hear whispers of in both movies. But in the end of Gladiator 2, there's finally this like nod to that potential. It might happen, right? And I think as Christians, we can watch that and appreciate like movies can give us, they can stir up our loves and our desire, our longing for that new creation, for that city of God to come down from heaven, like a bride, and that Revelation, 21 and 22 future. Sometimes movies give us kind of nods in that direction, and that's a good thing. And I think when movies kind of stir our loves to something good, even if they're not intending to, because sometimes movies are so difficult and they're hard and they're depicting some really painful suffering in the world. But if they're pushing people in the direction of being more in tune with what they're longing for and for the justice and the goodness and the virtue that we feel is missing, but we're longing for, that's a good thing, right? Because rightly ordered loves is such an important part of human flourishing. And sometimes movies disorder our loves, right? They leave us longing in the wrong direction, lusting in the wrong direction. But occasionally, I think a good movie can kind of stir our loves in a healthy direction.
When you quoted Revelation there, the phrase made me think about these movies. Have you seen the City of God, City of Man pairings from Brazil?
Yeah. Fernando Meirelles.
I don't remember.
Is the director,
but man, those are good movies.
Yes, those are.
Those are very good.
Those are very good.
Street kids from the favelas.
Yeah.
That's the style of filmmaking. I forget the name of it, where you basically get real people from those places, like the Florida Project. Yeah, neorealism. Which has got to be really difficult, but really rewarding because it does feel so authentic.
Yeah, I love that. That's kind of one of my favorite genres of movies is the kind of pseudo documentary neorealist where non-actors, normal people are utilized because it just gives the film that much more authenticity. It's putting the camera on reality. To go back to what we've been talking about with art is kind of framing the world as it is and putting the camera on some aspect of God's world or putting an artist's frame around some aspect of God's world. That's why I love documentaries. There's a genre that truly document.
Yes.
A lot of documentaries these days are basically like opinion pieces. They're like propaganda. But a good documentary does the work of just documenting something, kind of taking some interesting snapshot of the world and its curiosities and its questions and its eccentricities and giving audiences a glimpse of that. I love watching a documentary about from some part of the world, like a National Geographic documentary from some, exotic part of the world, or just from a different culture or experience, because that's what art does. It kind of gives us pictures into this world and all of its diversity and its beauty and its mystery. And it's a way to glorify God, I think, so like a movie like City of God, I think I'm never going to go to that part of Rio. I'm never going to experience that. But that's the power of movies, right? Yeah. They can transport you to another place, another culture, and books as well. Yeah. It's like time travel. It's a beautiful thing. And I mean, I think about this sometimes, like the fact that God created us with the capacity to do this, to imagine other worlds, like to be reading text on a page and to like be in that world, like, 17th century France or, 20th century trenches of World War I, or like the Red Badge of Courage, like to be there in like the Civil War battle, like, and you can really feel like you're there when you're reading that. Like that's just mind blowing. Like I don't think we stop and think about like consciousness enough and imagination and just how miraculous it is that we can like, and it's why dreams are so crazy. Like literally when you're asleep, you are going to other worlds and you're going to other times and you're like, and it feels real. Isn't that, it's just mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
And I feel like God is giving us all of this is like, it's a little foretaste, like little kind of echoes of eternity that intrude into the everyday lives. Like, and that's at the arts at their best, beauty at its best is that. I think it's God giving us a kind of
a foretaste.
A foretaste, just an echo from eternity that stirs our heart to long for the permanence of eternity.
Piper, in a recent Ask Pastor John thing, was talking about why art tends to trend towards darkness. And his answer is, it's easier to capture darkness than it is to capture light. I was really intrigued by that idea. Mm-hmm. And then literally the next week, I read a book called Theo of Golden. Mm-hmm. You've heard of it? Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's exactly what he was talking about. He captured the light perfectly, and this must have been really difficult. Take it away.
And he's absolutely right. And I think this is why like so many of like the Academy Award nominated performances in movies tend to be like villains. Like think about like Heath Ledger with Joker, or Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood. Like it's easier to perform brokenness and evil than goodness and virtue. And I think in literature and storytelling, it's easier to kind of render an interesting character who is more broken and villainous and sinful than it is to portray kind of true goodness. I remember being in a literature class in college and having this whole discussion of like, are there examples of like literature where like a good virtuous character is memorable and compelling? And there are a few. And I actually think that when a movie comes along or a TV show that portrays characters who are like virtuous, like I think about the Taylors in Friday Night Lights, Coach Taylor and Tammy Taylor. Did you watch that show, Friday Night Lights?
No.
You have to watch it. Okay. It's being rebooted.
Oh, well, it's probably going to be terrible, right?
The reboot may be terrible, but the original was excellent. And Kyle Chandler and Connie Britton play the coach and his wife. And one of the great things about that show is that their marriage is healthy and they love each other and they sacrifice for one another constantly. And it's this like rare picture of like virtue and fidelity in a marriage. And also his performance as the coach is like, he's just a good guy and not perfect, but good. And so, but those are few and far between. Most of the like compelling TV is like Succession or The Wire or Breaking Bad, like Mad Men, like these shows that like mostly are about really messed up people and how broken they are, because that's more, I think it's easier to capture that because every actor is very, very flawed and broken and they can maybe relate to that, to the darkness more. But audiences tend to like that. And that's an interesting question. It's sort of perverse, but we all love a car crash, right? The Gawker effect. And that's connected to this. So for the same reason that we like binge watch Breaking Bad, which is a show of one long car crash of a life and a family, is the same reason why we like can't resist looking at crashes, on TV or on the highways. There's something morbid. We're curiously morbid, morbidly curious, and the arts capture that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also something I think when, as a Christian, you grow in empathy and debate about that word aside, I mean it in the best possible sense of the term, being able to enter into someone else's experience.
Yeah.
That I think the more spiritually immature you are, like when I was younger, I could watch like videos of like people falling off of a ladder, and I just be like, I laugh. Oh, that's hilarious. Now I watch it and I go, oh, I hope he's okay. I wonder. I'm thinking about the hospital bill and the long road to recovery for that arm that's bent backwards. Yeah. And I think when I was younger, I used to be able to watch movies about subject matter that was pretty gruesome, and I could just go right to sleep. It wouldn't bother me. And these days, it's just not quite the same. Like it just it affects me differently.
Yeah.
I'm even thinking about. I tried to watch. Angel Studios is actually doing a pretty good job of putting out some Christian movies recently. I was watching their movie about. I don't remember the name. The foster family, the black pastor and his wife, and they adopt.
Yes.
All these foster kids.
What was the name of that? I saw it. It was the name of a town, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
Don't remember. Anyways. There was a scene in that movie where a child, it was uncovered that a child had been abused. I couldn't watch anymore. It was it. I was weeping. I was done watching the movie, Yeah. And I think that is owing not just to age,
right,
and like growing in softness. I think it's owing in part to growing in godliness. You know, so much
sure.
of my life now is bearing with others, weeping with them when they weep, celebrating. Like that empathy muscle has been strengthened, and it's changed the way I interact with art.
Yeah.
Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot.
Possum Trot, yeah, that's what I was remembering. Yeah, and I think this kind of connects with some of what we can talk about later with scrolling ourselves to death. But I do think there's a bad dynamic that happens when you're so exposed to bad news and kind of stories of calamity, and maybe you watch one too many really raw movies about like street level kind of life and like the underbelly, the underworld, like that you become numb, and your empathy muscle atrophies because you're so exposed to it that it just becomes kind of content that you consume, and it doesn't prick your heart in the way that it should. I do think empathy is a God instilled thing. Like untethered empathy is a real problem, and we can talk all about that. It's a different conversation. So,
but can I just say real quick, and I'm saying this, not you, I do not appreciate Joe Rigney's approach to this. I don't appreciate him saying that this word is utterly irredeemable. He said the same thing about nuance. Yeah. And I just think that's preposterous.
For sure.
Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's an example of the pendulum problem, right?
Yeah.
Like there can be things that are problematic about empathy in the way that it's deployed culturally currently. But at the same time, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the instinct to empathize relationally when you see, like you were saying, someone falling off of a ladder or a scene of abuse, if we're not reacting in an empathetic way, something's wrong with us. Yeah. We're dead inside. We've been numbed. And I think that is happening in the digital age because we're so inundated with stories of trauma and abuse and movies that have all manner of violence and explicit content and language. Like all of that is numbing us and I think eroding some of our good empathy instincts. I think we have to be careful with what we consume in media for a lot of reasons. But if you find yourself not reacting in a rightly ordered way emotionally when you're watching something that should get an emotional rise out of you, that's a problem.
Well, brother, we could keep talking all day about all things art and culture, movies, music.
We could, yeah.
But you're really here to talk about TGC's new book, Scrolling Ourselves to Death.
Yes.
So this is basically you guys taking Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, which, by the way, fantastic book.
Yeah.
It's definitely in like the must-read category, I think.
For sure.
And you take that where he's dealing with all the problems of entertainment media, television, movies, and stuff like that, as compared to like reading, writing. And you're saying in light of the new media, which you guys call dopamine media, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
In light of the development of dopamine media, the internet, smartphones, all this stuff, What do Neil Postman's insights have to say to this cultural moment and this technology? Did I basically summarize that well?
Yeah. I mean, the book is 40 years old this year in 2025. Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, came out in 1985. So a couple years ago, we realized, a lot of us on TGC's editorial staff love that book, have been kind of influenced by Postman. And so we wanted to do something to celebrate his the 40th anniversary of that book. We thought about doing like just an article, kind of revisiting that book. But then we got to thinking about like, there's actually a lot there that could be relevant to apply to today's technological media landscape. So what if we did like an edited volume book where we took a bunch of different thinkers, kind of the best Christian thinkers right now on technology and media, and had them reread Postman's book, which we had all the contributors like revisit that book and then apply his insights to certain aspects of our digital lives today with an eye towards the church and helping church leaders and Christians live well and live wisely in the digital age. So that was kind of the idea and the impetus.
Well, you guys succeeded. I mean, it is absolutely phenomenal. You and Ivan Mesa edited this.
We co-edited it.
Yes. It must have been a labor of love.
It was, yeah. I had never edited a book before. I've authored several books. I've contributed chapters to other edited volumes, but I had never been on the editor side. And it is a different challenge. It's totally interesting to kind of wrangle a lot of different writers with different personalities and writing styles and writing kind of strengths and weaknesses and try to create something cohesive. And just as you can imagine, there's just a lot of like just kind of busy work tasks with like copy editing each chapter as it comes in and making sure that things aren't repeated in different chapters because each author isn't aware of what others are writing. So it was a challenge, but I enjoyed it. And Ivan is one of my favorite humans on the planet. So to be able to put this together with him has been a blast, and we're really excited to release it.
Okay, so speaking of, this author, you don't want him to say what this author says. Nevertheless, you're going to bump into recurring themes.
Yes.
So I have a list sort of in my mind of some of the recurring themes, but why don't you run us through? So I'm thinking like epistemology and how it's shaped by technology. What are some of the recurring themes addressed in this book?
Yeah, epistemology is a big one. So a lot of the chapters wrestle with the kind of elusive nature of truth in the digital age, and we're in a post-truth era, and you don't know what to trust online, and trust in general culturally is in free fall. No one trusts institutions, including church institutions. No one trusts the media. Trust in legacy media, as we know, is at like an all-time low. And so that has theological ramifications, right? How do you communicate as the church, as a pastor with authority in a skeptical culture like this? So there's a lot of chapters that talk about that. There's a lot of chapters that talk about like the shift in kind of logic and rationality, which Postman kind of associated with what he called the typographic mind, which is kind of the Enlightenment, the literary age, where people were well-read and they could read and they could process arguments and engage with arguments. That has all changed, right? And he was noticing it 40 years ago with the rise of television, kind of a more image-based culture, but we're that much more kind of post-literate now in the scrolling age, because now if attention spans were low 40 years ago, they're like minute now. And we struggle, even someone like me, and I'm guessing you, we love books. We can read books, but sometimes I struggle to like focus for long periods of time. Sometimes I'm wanting to read an article and I find myself just scanning it and kind of looking at the subheadings, and I can't really read for long periods of time. If that's happening for me, a fairly literate author, writer, editor, I can't imagine what the average like Gen Alpha person, what their experience is. So
is that the new one, Gen Alpha? I've not heard that before.
Yeah. Okay. I think your kids are maybe Gen Alpha.
Gen Alpha,
mine too. So for digital natives they've grown up in this world of scrolling and interfacing with content in this kind of like scrolling, swiping, not so much reading physical books world, although I hope they still read physical books in school. It's just a different way of processing information and perceiving the world. And so what does that do for, let's say, apologetics and how to like have a rational discussion with someone about the truth or untruth of a claim in a culture that is increasingly okay with incoherence and inconsistency? And you go on social media for 5 minutes and you see that this is true. People don't really, they don't register inconsistencies. They don't recognize it in themselves. They can tweet something one day and then something different the next day, and they can be contradictory, but they don't care. Things have moved on.
Right.
The pace of culture moves so fast that we don't take time to reflect on something we argued 5 minutes ago, or something that someone else said, something that a president said yesterday that was untrue. Things go so fast that we just don't care, and we move on. So logic and arguments and hashing out the truth in that literate style of the typographic age, that's a bygone era.
Yeah.
So for Christians, how do we, as preachers, as apologists, as evangelists, how do we deal with that? How do we impart the gospel? How do we impart biblical truth to a culture that increasingly doesn't think about truth in quite the same way? So a lot of the chapters in the middle part of the book are about that. Okay. Part 2 of the book is looking at like Christian communicators and preachers and apologists and how they navigate this new world. One other theme that I'll highlight that I think is interesting that comes up is just the importance of embodiment in a digital age and all the weird things that start to go wonky when we live so much of our lives disembodied in digital spaces where you interact with people through avatars and you've never met someone, you don't even know what someone looks like, but you spend a lot of energy debating them on X. You have podcasts that you listen to, but you're not in any relationship with them. They don't know you, but they've sort of become a spiritual guru to you, a pastor type figure to you, but you have no embodied connection to them.
When you're in the hospital, they're not going to come and hold your hand.
Right, they're not. And so we really lean into that dynamic because we think that this is one of the ways the church can be life in a scrolling ourselves to death world. That's the part 3 of the book is kind of more of an optimistic section of the book. A lot of the book is fairly depressing, if I'm honest, but we try to end on a positive note.
But that's interesting though, because you guys did fix one of the big holes with Postman, which he was big on description. Things are pretty bad and they're getting worse, and he had no idea what was coming. Yeah. But he was light on prescription, what to do to fix. And so you guys come in the last third, and just, I mean, a big part of it is the church. Yeah. The church is a big answer.
It's a huge answer. And I think that where we go wrong as the church responding to this digital age is we try to be like it, right? We try to do online church or like be like heavily on social media and meet people where they're at. And I don't want to knock that completely because I think
you work for TGC.
I work for TGC, and being digitally savvy is important, and having a nice website, all of that is important. It's the front door of your church these days, for better or worse. Like most people are going to find your church online, and
church signs basically don't matter at all.
Yeah, right. So there are good things, and that's another thing that I want to like make sure I say about this book is we're not Luddites. We're not like saying all things related to digital technology are bad and problematic. There are good uses of it and redeeming uses of it, and of course we have to believe that because we're a TGC, we're a digital ministry. We are doing an example, I hope, of redemptive use of current technologies. And even as we do that, we're aware of the risks and the challenges and very mindful of the fact that like we might be adding to the noise. We might be adding to the scrolling addiction. We hope that we're not, but we might be, right? And so we're mindful of some of those like paradoxes even as we're putting together this book. But yeah, to go back to the church, like the embodied church experience of like coming into a community where you're rubbing shoulders with people who are very different from you, who are not just your echo chamber on X. A lot of people who think like you, who look like you, who like to kind of cheer for the same political whatever wins and losses. Like going to a church, you're mixing and mingling with God's family, this unchosen kin, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that takes you out of yourself. It takes you out of the main character syndrome, which social media, I was just reading Brad Edwards' great new book on the church, and he talks about one of the ways that social media has kind of become a problem for churches is it cultivates this sense of like you are the main character of everything. Like the iPhone, right? The lowercase I is the paradigm of our age. Technology revolves around the self. It's an iPhone. It's iPods. Apple was brilliant because they captured the metaphor for digital technology in that one lowercase letter.
Incredible.
They're getting at the fact that everything that's new since Postman's age in terms of media is this algorithmically tailored to you individualistic orientation of technology. Everyone experiences the world differently because everyone opens their phone and it's tailored to them. Their news is different than you and me are seeing different news by virtue of what we've clicked on before. Every individual has a hyper-curated, individualized experience of the world. And the smartphone is this personal kind of remote control for controlling everything. Like it puts you in the driver's seat. The world is your oyster. You know, think about like Google Maps and even how like maps have changed in the last few decades. Like you used to open a map and where you were on the map didn't matter. You were looking at the bigger picture and you had to do the work of trying to find where you were and where you were going. You open up Google Maps and the blue dot is you and everything revolves around you. So geographically, you are the center of the universe through the smartphone. With capitalism and buying and selling things, you are the center of the universe. 2 clicks and you can get anything you want. Open Netflix and entertainment streaming sites. Everything is tailored to you. We don't watch the same things. There's not 3 channels that we all have to kind of orient our lives around. Yeah. It used to be, we're old enough to remember, like we used to have to like turn on Friends at a certain night. Was it Thursday nights? I forget.
I think so. The Thursday night lineup.
Yeah. Like Friday night, TGIF on ABC. Like there was like appointment television and that's all gone. Now everything is tailored around you and your convenience and when you want to watch something. So all of that to say, this main character syndrome has huge but subtle consequences in ways that we don't recognize. And when you go to a church, having been steeped through technology in this kind of sense of the world is my oyster, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want it, it's all about my convenience, I have the power to unfollow or follow you. If you say something that gives me the ick, I'm going to unfollow you. I'm out, right? We have that power as digital consumers. And so when you go into a church, let's say the pastor like says something grating or slightly unpleasant. Well, in the digital age, you're so used to just kind of unfollowing, opting out, that's the mentality. And this idea that you would go to a church and it wouldn't be about you, and the story you're entering is not, it's decidedly not about.
You're not the main character.
You're not the main character. God is the main character. So,
and everything that God is telling you every week is to orient yourself towards other people, to emptying yourself, serve them.
It's absolutely counter to the logic of the digital age, but that's exactly the strength of the church. And it's what we're calling for the church to lean into, because we are betting that there's going to be people in the younger generation who grow kind of a little sick of themselves. They don't want the world to revolve around them. They long to be part of something bigger, something grander, something less esoteric and kind of inward looking. And so for churches, that's why like the seeker sensitive kind of like audience pleasing approach to church isn't serving them, because I suspect people are going to want to come to church and have the opposite experience where they are challenged to get outside of themselves, to serve others, to be part of God's story, to be part of what he's doing, put the focus, the attention on him. Even to your book about singing, I think people are going to want to sing songs that are about God and rehearsing his attributes, not just kind of regurgitating our own emotional processing, which is what we do all day, every day on Instagram and social media. Like that kind of navel gazing emotional expression. We want to break from that. Like, and the church can be a break from that in the healthiest ways possible.
Yes.
So.
Well, brother, there are so many standout essays in this book. I mean, they're all good. Different essays are going to hit different people in different ways.
Yeah.
And as the editor of the book, I can't expect you to speak with authority on everything that was written. But so let me start. I mean, Joe Carter essay, Patrick Miller's essay, Collins, we're all very good. Let me start with your essay, and then if we have time, we'll dig into some of the other content. I love so much about it. Hey, let's start with this. What is an information action ratio?
Yeah. So my chapter is basically taking that one concept from Postman, Using Ourselves to Death, which he called the information action ratio. And what it is he was arguing that kind of humans flourish best when there's a pretty even ratio between the information that comes into their brains and the action they can take in light of that information. So, and for most of human history, you can understand that it was a pretty even ratio because there weren't technologies that brought the wider world into your perception field. You were only really aware of your immediate context, right? Your family, your town, your village, maybe a little farther afield. Sometimes you were aware of what was happening in the next town over. But even in those slightly farther afield, incidents, there was action you could take. If there was like a flood at the neighboring village and you wanted to go help, you could. There was action you could take. What changed and what Postman was getting at is when mass technology, mass communication, the telegraph, radio, television started to bring the entire world into our consciousness. Suddenly, the news of the world was something that we could know about. On a daily basis, you could open the newspaper and you could be aware of all manner of calamities, injustices, things happening all over the world in far-flung places you would never have the ability to go to or help with. He said that the ratio started to get imbalanced, so that we were inundated with information, but most of it was unactionable information. And if that was true when he was writing 40 years ago, I think it's become infinitely more true now when social media, we open our phones and all day we're scrolling through what amounts to this information deluge of things that are happening all over the world that like get an emotional rise in us, which is good. To go back to what we were talking about with empathy, like it would be bad if we saw a headline about a plane crash in Canada and didn't have an instinct of like, oh my, that's horrible. Like those poor people. It would be wrong if we saw a headline about genocide in Africa and didn't feel the urge to want to do something. Yeah. But what Postman is getting at is that very urge that's within us, the God-given urge to want to take action. It kind of backfires when we're full of information about which we can't take action. The only meaningful action we can take is just to be aware. And so one thing I talk about in the chapter is how awareness has become this new kind of elevated virtue in society. Yeah. I think that's where the word woke comes from ultimately. It's like we now view awareness as the ultimate justice activity.
Yeah.
Like, and of course, in a social media world where that's really the only thing you can do is to be aware of a police shooting in the other side of the country, because you can't do anything about it tangibly, but you can be woke to it. You can be awake to the injustice. You can be aware. But that I think becomes problematic because awareness ultimately doesn't amount to much. Right. Like there are diminishing returns of value for simply being aware. And I don't want to say there's nothing valuable about it.
Yes.
But here's where it's becomes a problem. When you're more aware by virtue of social media of all the injustices happening in other parts of the world that you don't actually have time or interest in your own neighborhood and helping your neighbor with what they're struggling with, or working with your city or the nonprofits in your city to like address immediate needs. I see that happening all the time. Yeah. I'm sure you do. I know I see so many people who could tell you a lot about whatever the like outrage of the day is on X, but like they couldn't name one like pressing problem facing their city that they and their church could maybe help actually take action and solve, right? It's this weird dynamic where the local is being overtaken by the global, which comes to us through our devices so easily and so constantly.
Yes, brother. You have a list here of what happens when we are overinformed but underactivated, when the ratio is off.
Yeah.
I'll list them all at once and then we'll run through them. We become more anxious, angry, addicted, numb, lonely, delusional, detached from reality. Let's start with anxious. How does this ratio being off make us more anxious?
Yeah, I mean, you can understand how like being so inundated all the time, day in and day out with information, and this part of this is the media industry, right? We have to understand the economics of like media are such that bad news is more lucrative. It just is. It's going to get clicked on. It's the whole bystander effect and gawking. Right. People are curious about a headline about a plane crash. They will click on that. If there's a video of a plane falling out of the sky, we all will click on that, right? So there's money to be made. And when there's money to be made, it means that every incentive is to fill people's feeds with outrage, incendiary headlines, things that people will want to click on. But when we're inundated with negativity and outrage and scary news from around the world, of course we're going to get anxious. Like it's not surprising at all that anxiety is surging. You know, it's on the rise. It has been for a while because I don't think we're created to bear the mental burden of a world's worth of calamities and injustices.
I wish I would have copied that C.S. Lewis quote.
Oh, isn't that a great quote?
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good that we won't say it here now.
We won't
you
say
just
it.
go
Read
look
the book.
It up. That's right.
It is one of his quotes that is so appropriate for our current cultural moment. I couldn't not include that. Yeah.
Anyways, okay. Anxious, angry. How does it make us angry?
Just the same thing about the incentives of media are outrage sells, getting people to fight, benefits, social media.
Addicted.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the dopamine media part comes in. So you referenced that. Like we talk about, like that's one of the big changes from Postman's day is media was addictive in the television era when he was writing, but it's more addictive now because social media is actually designed by behavioral psychologists to basically mimic slot machines. And that's what Patrick Miller writes about in his chapter on dopamine media. So they figured out like even like the like button, like all the little like parts of the platforms have been explicitly designed to kind of tap into the human addiction to dopamine and the little reward that you get chemically when you say something. Let's say something outrageous happened in politics today. If I post something on social media that I know is going to get a rise out of people either for it or against it, throughout the day you're going to get dopamine hits, right? When you check your social media and there's a number 3 with a red circle around it. Oh yeah.
Wow, people are engaging with my ideas.
And everything from the push notifications that come to your phone to the sounds they make, the little dings, those all are created to be like little dopamine hits, and the cumulative effect is we become addicted to it.
Yeah, that's right. So addicted, in fact. Have you seen this new technology, the brick?
Yes.
Not the brick.
It's like put your phone in kind of a...
Yeah, so there's different ways people have tried to like modify their phones essentially to break free from the addiction, right? So some answers are like you get a dumb phone, and that is definitely the right answer for some people.
Yeah.
Apple has tried to incorporate certain elements into its software to limit your amount of time, but that's too easy to bypass, work around. You
Screen
can
time.
Yeah, whatever. But this app it's not an app, it's a little thing, and you touch your phone to it, and it'll lock down all of the addictive stuff on your phone until you tap it again.
Yeah.
And I'm only highlighting that. Well, one, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And two, I think I need to get it. But three, it really highlights just how addicted we are. We're so addicted, we'll pay $200 for this thing.
Yeah.
That will essentially help us to have a period of our lives where we are really free from our phones.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about that connects with this is the way that you can see how addictive our phones have become is just walk around in any public place, right? An airport. What is the dominant posture is people walking around looking down at their phone, scrolling on their phone. It's almost, I was thinking,
heads down, phones out, finger scrolling.
Right.
This is the humanoid posture.
It's the first line of the book.
Yeah.
It's the first line of the book. And I did that. I was thinking, the mental image I had when I wrote that is, that like evolution kind of picture of like the ape gradually becoming like the man standing up. I think we've now gone past the man standing up, and the new evolutionary silhouette of a human is now kind of a hunched over. I literally think like around the world, humans have become that. That's our new posture. And it's because it's because we're so addicted that we have to fill every transition moment in life with scrolling. So if you're walking from one gate to the next in an airport, you have to fill that time. Like you're jittery like an addict. You have to kind of do that. If you're outside on a walk on a college campus and you're walking from one class to another, you have to do that. And you look at college campuses these days, and that's what students do. And what's so tragic about it from a Christian point of view is instead of looking around you at God's beautiful creation, at his image bearers who are walking past you in a busy airport, or his creation that is there for you to see and appreciate and be present in, you're not present. You're present with this disembodied, ethereal, abstract technology that is taking you everywhere else but where you are. You're not present. And so now you have this world where most of us are walking through life completely oblivious to where we are. And there's people who like every year, there's people who die because they like are scrolling and they get hit by a car. Or they're like, I just read an article about someone who had her hands bitten off by a shark because she was taking a selfie or trying to take a picture with a shark. Yeah. And, every year you see funny stories. So people are literally scrolling themselves to death in violent ways. The book is not about that primarily. It's more about the spiritual deaths that we experience. But yeah, it shows you just how addictive it is when our lives are being at risk. Distracted driving. People don't realize how absolutely risky. It's more risky than drunk driving. Like it's on the same level of risk, because all it takes is like 2 seconds of looking down at your phone to see a text message that came through. And that's, it could be the end of your life or someone else's life.
I've had my fair share of close calls where I've been like, gosh, I really have to stop checking my phone while I'm driving. And then the next day I'm right back to it.
But that just shows you how we're so conditioned, we're so addicted, even when we recognize the risks and the dangers. Just like with any addiction, like any alcoholic, any porn addict, like knows this is terrible for me. It comes with huge risks for me and the people I love most, and yet I can't stop doing it. Yeah. And so even with our phones, like I'm a parent, every parent knows the worst thing, the thing you really want to avoid and you try your hardest to avoid is being on your phone when your kids are around. Yeah. And yet I still do it all the time. And that just shows you how tragically addicted we are.
We become numb when we're overinformed and underactivated.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little earlier when we were discussing empathy, but yeah, when you're so bombarded with stories of calamities and tragedy and injustice and outrage, you can't help but eventually become kind of numb to it. Yeah. Like, oh, it's just another day, another disaster, another day, another, dehumanizing event in the world. Yeah. So, yeah, and that's not good.
Yeah, and I think, numb is just another way of saying apathetic as well. Mm-hmm. Lonely?
Yeah, there's lots of talk these days about like loneliness epidemics, and it's real, and it's it's totally sad because it goes back to the eye metaphor for the digital age. Like when the world is revolving around each of us as individuals and we're seeing the world differently from everyone else, when given a choice of how to spend 5 minutes waiting for our latte at Starbucks between looking at our personalized media experience or having a conversation with a barista or someone else waiting for the coffee.
Someone in line with you, yeah.
We always choose the individual. So, of course, a byproduct of that is loneliness. These technologies are curving us inward more and more, and they're alienating us from our neighbor more and more, sometimes even from our own spouses. Like the most depressing like tableau image to represent our digital age is the family at a dinner table where everyone is on their device.
Together but not together.
Together but not together. Alone together, right? So it's a lonely age. And again, I think this is where the church can really be a counter-formational institution to re-enchant people to the awkward but essential beauty of Christian community, which is what the subtitle was of my book, Uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable for people who are conditioned to the comfort and convenience of digital life. The physical experience of church is going to be awkward and uncomfortable because suddenly I don't get to choose who I'm sitting by or who I'm listening to, or every aspect isn't something I can tweak the dials of to my convenience. But that's exactly why it's so important to form people towards the beauty and the messiness of being in relationships.
I was in line somewhere the other day listening to an audiobook, of course, and I said redeeming the time to justify it. And a guy started talking to me. I paused my little bone conduction headphones. I paused the audiobook. And I remember thinking, why are you talking to me?
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty extroverted person, and I think I'm an evangelist.
Yeah.
And my first thought wasn't, another human being that I can interact with, or somebody, maybe this is the Lord opening the door. It was, this is very weird for this person to engage with me, even though I don't know them.
Right.
And so when you talk about it being awkward and uncomfortable, that's very much the case for people who have been raised in this sort of digital silo.
Yeah.
When they come to church for the first time, and if you have a warm, welcoming, hospitable church, people walk up to them and give them a good dose of Christian love.
Right.
They don't know what to do with it. I mean, sometimes people flee from that. They don't know how to respond.
Right.
Even if they're not mad, they are uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the dynamics that is so big in the digital age is this idea of spectating. Like we can live so much of our lives by just being kind of silent, unseen spectators of what's going on. And when you get used to that, where it's so easy to just kind of peer in on conversations happening but not engaging, to go into a church where suddenly you're put on the spot and you have to engage can be super awkward and challenging.
Which is why a lot of people go to churches where they don't have to do that. I mean, in our backyard, we have Church of the Highlands, one of the largest, fastest growing churches in the country.
It's the appeal of that type of church.
I can go in and go out, and other than the very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed greeter at the door, I'm really not going to have to engage with anybody. Even when I'm in the room, the lighting is going to be so low that I feel like nobody can see me. You know, I can just I can kind of get what I need from here and head out.
Yeah, it mimics the experience of you in your dark bedroom with your phone. Doing whatever you want to do with no one looking. You don't want the church to mimic that. That's not a good idea. Turn on the lights, let people be seen. It's why the live stream church was such a terrible idea. I get that we had to do it, during the pandemic for a short time.
Did we though? Anyways.
Well, that's another conversation. But it's so bad because it plays right into the ease and convenience, as if church is primarily just about content transmission for you to get what you want out of it and then to go on your merry way without ever having to have the, friction and complexity of community and relationship. Yeah.
Okay, you also become delusional.
What did I say about that?
No, I don't remember. I'll go on to the next one.
Okay.
You become detached from reality. I think we've kind of already hit on that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. You have some practical steps for us here. Number one, audit your news and information diet. So let me tell you one small way that I've done that.
Yeah.
I felt a little dopamine hit for myself when I read that. I said, I think I'm doing that.
Nice.
There's this guy named Isaac Saul.
Okay.
He puts together a Tangle, a politics and news newsletter, where he basically gets 3 sources from the left, 3 sources from the right. Axios style kind of highlights what they're saying, but gives you a link if you want to explore them further. Then gives you his take. He's kind of center left, but he's very reasonable, which I need actually because I'm so hardcore conservative, you know. And I don't know. When I read that, I thought, okay, I actually think I've done that. Rather than spending all my time being anxious, trying to keep up with everything that's happening in the news and in the political world.
Right.
I have a very cultivated email that comes to me 5 days a week that takes me less than 15 minutes to read. It allows me to, on the one hand, feel like I'm still part of the informed citizenry.
Right.
On the other hand, it allows me to kind of get what I need and walk away and kind of carry on with my life.
Yeah.
Now, there's some downsides to that because anytime something's curated, there's going to be some
sort of bias.
There's going to be some sort of bias. But you want to go to the people who are out front about their biases and who will say, you know, who have a history of saying we missed the mark here because of our bias, which they do very well. Anyways, all that to say, that's one example of doing what you said.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have much to add there. I think that's great. And find like a source that is even-handed and actually like cares about honest, free speech conversations. Like the Free Press, Barry Weiss, I think does a really good job of that. So I value
And she has a history of going against her tribe, which lends credibility.
That lends credibility, And what you said about like actually being transparent about errors and coming forward and saying we got it wrong and not doubling down, that also gives credibility. The other thing I would say about auditing your news intake is like make sure that local news is in the mix, because this connects to like our out of whack kind of focus on the national scene and what's happening far away, but our relative ignorance of what's going on close to home. So whether it's the local TV news or a local paper, or just like I follow a few local council members and like politicians in Orange County, and they're good sources of kind of the more local scene. So I think that's a part of being a responsible, informed citizen, is making sure that you're actually informed about the thing that you can take action on most effectively, which is your local situation.
Matt Martin's, in his book, Reforming Criminal Justice, his excellent book.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that he says towards the end is, you know, what your vote for a president is probably not going to change very much about how a DA chooses to pursue this this trial in your local county courthouse.
Yeah.
But you can actually do a lot at the local level to make sure that justice is being pursued.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So good. Okay. Embrace your limits, which is interesting because I wasn't aware that I had any.
Yeah. That's kind of the mantra of our day, right? Limitless. There's like a Netflix show, I think, called Limitless with Chris Hemsworth. But yeah, I mean, technology these days proposes limitlessness all the time, right? It's the smartphone is an invitation to try to be godlike in every way, right? Omniscience. Google is your gateway to omniscience, omnipotence. Like there's an app for that. Anything you want to do, anywhere you want to go, you can do it with your phone. But omnipresence.
Even on that note, though, Postman does a really good job talking about how access to more information in some ways is making us stupider because information needs to be plugged into a structure that's pre-existing.
Yeah.
And a lot of us don't have structures. We're just kind of, there's a smattering of information, but it doesn't congeal in any kind of coherent way.
Yeah, absolutely. The information glut is making us stupider for sure. Like, and there's books that are being written, science that's showing this. Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, is that's kind of a dated book now. There's even more recent research that's showing this. There's a book that I like called Reader Come Home by Marianne Wolf, that she gets into like the science that's showing that like literally reading is a dying skill. Like reading longer form books, because of the dominant way we interact with information is this kind of surface level information excavation, kind of getting what you want from Google and then leaving getting tidbits of trivial information, but never putting it all together in a narrative. So that bigger picture context, going deeper with one idea, with one author's perspective for a long haul in a book, is just a harder skill in today's world. Our brains are being rewired in a more kind of scatterbrained, like information that comes in one ear and out the other without ever really processing deeply. So
another recommendation that comes from you is interesting. It's not actually in your chapter. Somebody else quotes you in their chapter.
From the Wisdom Pyramid.
From the Wisdom Pyramid. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, the Wisdom Pyramid, my last book with Crossway, is kind of like a book length treatment of the whole like audit your intakes, your like news media intakes. In order to be wise, you have to pay attention to what's coming into you. And my big argument there, and it's kind of like a food pyramid, kind of like I use that image of like, what are the most important food groups and what are the lesser important food groups of information. So the Bible and the church are the more foundational ones. And so my argument is you have to be shaped and you have to be filled with the eternal things, right, in order to be wise. Like in a culture of ephemerality where like social media is going and coming so quickly and then it's so disposable and we don't remember what was big news on X yesterday, let alone a week ago. None of that is going to help you become wise. Like it's the things that endure that help you become wise. So read, God's eternal word, like be part of the church, this eternal institution that will outlive this universe. Like, and read books, like read old books, read books that have stood the test of time. Like, in general, the older, the more enduring things, the things that are tied to embodiment, nature. I have in the Wisdom Pyramid, like go outside, be kind of confronted with your physicality, exercise, like all of that is good for your wisdom, because it reminds you of your limitations and it acts as this kind of buffer against the temptation towards godlike limitlessness. So that connects with your original question was about limits and reminders of our limits. And I think that that's another reason why the information action ratio is so important, because we are limited beings. We don't have God's capacity to carry the world's burdens mentally. We don't have that mental capacity, let alone take action to address. We are very limited. We can do a few things in our proximate community, starting with our family, tending to our family, making sure our house is in order, our church, our local community. But that is good to be reminded of your limited capacity to take action. We can't solve the world's problems. Doesn't mean it's bad to be aware of them necessarily, but we need to be more aware of the things that we can actually take action with.
All right, here's a quote from Thaddeus Williams, who, by the way, he's such a fun writer.
Oh, he's great.
He's so vibrant. And
he's a great writer and a good writer. Okay, one thing that I think sets the best writers apart is they skillfully deploy nouns in their writing more than adjectives. Adjectives are fairly abstract words, but nouns are concrete, right? Nouns bring images to your mind, and that's good writing, and he's really good at that. So, sorry, just geeking
that's
out
really
over good writing.
Yeah, that's right.
I love Thaddeus.
Yeah, I first found his stuff with confronting injustice without compromising the truth.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, he really threaded this needle perfectly.
Yeah. Have you read Revering God, his new?
So I have it.
Yeah.
I'm saving it to read it right before we interview him, so that it's fresh on the mind.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. What I also really liked about that book, Confronting Injustice Without Compromising the Truth, was actually the strategy of the way that the book worked, wherein he just slowly turned the temperature up on these critical ideologies from the beginning of the book. Like, so the frog didn't know it was being boiled.
Yeah.
But by the time you're at the end of the book, you're cooked. You know? So it shows a lot of forethought in the way that he even structured the book.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Given our truth-telling mission, Christians should be the most cautious about posting and reposting unsubstantiated, sensationalistic content and conspiracy theories. This becomes especially vital as AI technology and increasingly blurred increasingly blurred the line between facts and fakery, the genuine and the generated. This is another one of those great lines from him.
Yeah.
The facts and the fakery, the genuine and the generated, the human and the pseudo-human. The presence of Christians on social media should add to the net amount of truth, goodness, and beauty while reducing the amount of nonsense in cyberspace. What a great quote.
Amen. Yeah.
So talk to us about the way Christians interact online, how we should think about our, conspiracy theories and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be nuanced here because
there's plenty of room for it.
There's room for nuance here. The fact is, some conspiracy theories that in recent years have been labeled conspiracy theories have actually turned out to not be conspiracy theories. So I don't want to knock like what we call conspiracy theories. Sometimes truth feels like a conspiracy theory because it seems so outrageous that could be true, that COVID could have originated in a lab in China. Like, well, that was called a conspiracy theory, but now, 5 years later, it's viewed as more likely than not to be the truth. And a lot of truth takes time to come out. And so at first it feels more like outlandish and conspiratorial. So all that to say, I don't think it's always what we call conspiracy theories isn't. So we have to be careful with that term. Yeah. And I think when we lob that around casually and call someone a conspiracy theorist, we need to maybe think twice about that. Yeah. There's ways that you can ask questions, kind of like probe it, like where are your sources? Like if we see someone posting something and we're like, oh, they're just it's my crazy uncle on Facebook sharing a conspiracy theory yet again. Yeah. Instead of just like labeling him a conspiracy theorist, just add a comment, send him a message. Like, could you just I would love to know where you are getting that information and what are some sources and are they reputable sources? And let's try to discern the truth through a more rigorous research process without demeaning them, because I think sometimes we demean people by just calling them conspiracy theorists and being done. And when the press does that, which they have done during COVID, instead of actually following the trail of the facts with the origins of COVID, which they could have done, as journalists they should have done, they just shut down the conversation by saying, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. That's a wild conspiracy theory. That was an absconding of their duty. They weren't doing the pursuit of truth requires hard work. And it means giving a fair hearing to claims that sound like conspiracy theories. So I'm feeling like an apologist for conspiracy theorists right now.
No, but I appreciate the balance.
Yeah. So with that said, I do think one of the great temptations of our day with how fast information processes, a big part of the rise of conspiracy theories is the speed of things. Information moves way too fast, way faster than the pursuit of truth necessitates, right? Like I just said, finding the truth takes time. It necessarily does.
And then to have the wisdom to know what to do with that truth takes even more time.
Right. So because of the speed of social media, you can see something posted, it feels truthy, it resonates with you as oh, that's probably true. So I'm going to retweet that. I'm going to share that. And 5 minutes later, it's going viral. And before you know it, something that isn't true goes around the world. And it's so instantiated in the world's collective awareness that when the truth does come out, no one kind of goes back to check that. And there's so many examples of this in recent history where a narrative takes off in the media and it's not true. Think about the Jussie Smollett case. There was this media narrative that latched onto it as oh, this hate crime. This actor was a victim of a hate crime. Yeah. And it fits with a narrative. It fits with the rise of white supremacy in our culture because of Donald Trump. And it's a convenient piece of ammo for that narrative. So the media took that, ran with it. It spread like wildfire. Well, the truth came out later that he faked it. It was a hoax. There was no truth, but the damage was already done, right? The truth. So for Christians, I think we just have to be careful that we're not part of that problem, that we're not perpetuating falsehood that might turn out to be falsehood. just because something feels truthy, it feels like accurate, that's not a good enough reason to like spread it. You need to like take a moment and do an iota of reflection, research before you like add fuel to some rapidly spreading fire. One example that I mention a lot when I'm talking about this is whenever 9/11 comes around, the anniversary of the September 11th attacks, every year you can set your watch by it. The same thing goes viral on social media. It's this transcript. It's called a transcript of Todd Beamer's last phone call on United 93. If you remember, Todd Beamer was the Let's Roll guy. He was the Wheaton College graduate who was overheard from a phone operator saying, "Let's roll." And anyway, so there's this.
Let's roll in what context?
Are you not familiar with that?
I don't know the story.
Oh, okay. As a Wheaton graduate, maybe I'm over familiar with this, but the thinking is that he and some other guys on the flight kind of organized a revolt to try to take the aircraft back from the hijackers. He was on the phone with an AT&T operator in his final moments, in the plane's final moments, and she overheard him say, "Okay, are you ready? Let's roll." And that became kind of a catchphrase in the post 9/11. So he became kind of a folk hero because he was seen as one of the heroes who tried to save the. Anyway, so every 9/11, there's this transcript that goes viral, and it's like supposedly the whole conversation with Todd Beamer and the airline person on the phone. And it's just false. There was no transcript. It's a pieced together kind of fabrication. But I see so many Christians every 9/11 sharing, isn't this a heartwarming, inspirational, and it's like, just because something is inspirational doesn't make it true. Right. It doesn't make it worthwhile for us to perpetuate. And that's where we have to be dogged in our commitment to truth as Christians. Right. It's not enough that something gives us good vibes. It's not enough that something is inspiring or is true enough. If it's not quite true and we're positioning it as true, if we're calling something a transcript of a conversation, but it's not, it's a fabrication, that matters. It erodes our credibility as people who have a claim on biblical truth.
Yeah.
If people are going to believe what we say about the truth of Scripture, but we're like perpetuating social media lies or kind of half-truths, then that's a problem. So it's so important that Christians think twice, put a little bit of friction between thinking about posting something and actually pressing the post button or retweet button.
TGC has been the victim of this a little bit, huh?
Oh boy. We're going to talk about some of that.
I mean, we don't have to if you don't want to, but
we can.
I mean, can you just give an example of like, because there's some pretty wild stuff going out there around the internet about TGC that people just take it as gospel truth.
Oh yeah,
no pun intended.
Yeah.
About you guys, can you give some examples of that you've seen over the years?
Yeah, I mean,
funded by.
Oh yeah, I mean, funded by George Soros or like part of Big Eva with like lots of billions of dollars coming from George Soros and government grants. I mean, that's like a very recent thing in the last few weeks. There's been this whole, because of like Doge and what Elon Musk is doing with uncovering where money is going, like there's like this uptick in like claims about like Christianity Today is funded by the government and like look at these numbers. And that's an example of like a lie or a distorted truth going viral everywhere only for like the truth to be very innocuous, which is CT received a PPP loan, during the pandemic. And that's where a lot of the government funding, came from. Just like a third of all churches during the pandemic received a PPP loan. So that's a classic example of like something, if it fits your narrative, it's going to be very convenient for you to kind of spread that as far as you can, even if the truth is a little bit different than what you're positioning it as. And so a lot of times at TGC we'll have things where like someone will run with like an article from 7 years ago that like an author wrote that like gives ammo for whatever narrative about TGC someone wants to advance. Yeah. But if you read the collective output of TGC over our entire lifetime, you'll see clearly it's a counterexample of what you're claiming about TGC. people often will like call TGC woke or like we're liberal and we don't speak up. They don't speak up. They don't have the courage to like speak up on LGBT issues.
Which is insane.
It's
you guys write
insane.
about that so much.
We write about it so much. And if anyone took the time to like count up the articles that are clearly, strongly pushing back against LGBT ideology, transgender. We were talking about transgender stuff way before anyone else was.
Not to be hipsterish about it, but you really were.
Honestly, like I don't want to sound like a hipster from Portlandia, but it's true. But that's the thing. Like people move on so quickly. The speed of things is so fast that we can't remember things. Like I can't remember that like I wrote an article about sexual ethics last year that was like very conservative, very strong, like, and I have to remind myself, oh yeah, I wrote this and I wrote this. And so if I can't remember and I'm an editor and a writer, your average consumer also can't remember. And so on one hand, I want to give grace because we live in a world where it's hard to just remember things because everything is so disposable. We move on quickly. But if you're going to make a claim, if you're going to lob some sort of grenade at an organization with some narrative that you have about them, do your research first and make sure that the evidence actually supports.
And research
what you're
is
claiming.
not reading Pulpit and Pen.
No. Yeah.
Okay. In light of that, do your research. So I've not read Megan Basham's Shepherds for Sale. It's just not the kind of thing I want to give my time and attention to.
Yeah.
But what I've heard from everyone is that it's extremely well researched, and TGC was like right in the crosshairs of that.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you guys in your world thinking about what she's saying about you? And also, I don't even really know what she's saying about you. I mean, I get the essence of it. Shepherds for Sale.
Yeah.
Is it basically just going back to like you've been funded by people with nefarious purposes? Is that kind of the gist of it?
Yeah, I haven't read it either, and yeah, I think the gist of it is this narrative that like Big Eva, like these evangelical institutions, have some sort of agenda to normalize leftism or kind of bring
churches down,
kind of a woke path.
Right.
And it's just absurd, and the truth is so opposite to that. And yeah, so I don't know what to say except I just shake my head, and it's an example of like selective facts that suit your narrative and ignoring the facts that don't. Look at the output of TGC on very conservative issues. Spend any amount of time actually researching that, and you'll see that we have been outspoken, adamant about standing with God's word on the very contested issues in our culture. And it's not without costs, and we lose people on the left constantly, but we're okay with that, right? Because we want, if you lose people on the extremes because they don't like that you're doggedly committed to God's word, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's a loss that you can take. And we experience that all the time at TGC on both sides.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think for me, that's what gives us credibility. And I hear this all the time from people who view TGC as trustworthy precisely because we're so willing to take hits all the time from people, because we're not doing it for applause from this tribe or that tribe. We're trying to seek the truth. We're trying to do that slow work of seeking the truth and how God's word and the gospel applies to these fluid cultural conversations. And we don't always get it right. And I'll be the first to say that sometimes we publish things that we shouldn't have published, and we could have been more careful. But we are pursuing truth in the sense of God's truth. That's our number one goal.
Yeah.
And we could care less about political agendas or pet projects of donors. That doesn't drive TGC at all. We don't have big donors. I wish we did. So we're not beholden to anyone close to George Soros. Yeah. So that's just laughable. We just laugh at that because
Yeah. What's funny is I actually know about organizations that I think everyone would think are much more conservative than you guys that have actually been funded by really big donors who actually have very, very strong incentives to try to use that organization for their own purposes.
I think it's been one of TGC's strengths. It's been a blessing and a curse because we haven't been super funded by private donations relative to other nonprofit ministries, and that's hard. And sometimes we wish there was more money to work with. But the upside of that is that we have never felt pressure at all to do anything editorially other than what we, as the editorial team, as the council, deem the agenda that, the gospel would lead us towards.
That's actually one of the reasons why Room for Nuance doesn't have sponsors.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with having sponsors. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
But Seinfeld reference, boom.
Yeah, nice.
Thanks. But I just want people to trust that if I'm sitting down to interview Brett McCracken, for example, and if TGC that I'm going to ask him the questions that need to be asked, that I'm not going to be beholden to him in any way because of his connection to TGC or because of our connection to TGC. TGC's never offered to sponsor us. I've never asked them. But let's say TGC was one of our big sponsors, and then I interview someone from TGC, and I need to have a tricky conversation.
Right.
I want our viewers to trust that I'm actually going to have that conversation.
Yeah.
That money's not going to influence me one way or another.
Yeah, right.
Now, having said that, we just put up a give button on the Room for Nuance website.
Nice.
So if you want to support us in any way, you can go click that button because this is not cheap. And
if you appreciate this conversation,
make
a gift right now.
That's right, yeah. Brother, we still have so much more to talk about. I'm having a good time. And if people are still listening, I'm assuming they are too. Let's talk about Technopoly. So this book is kind of like Samuel James's digital liturgy.
Yeah.
He pulls from 5 or 6 main influences. This book obviously pulls primarily from Postman.
Yeah.
Also a lot from Nicholas Cart.
Yeah.
Outdated, but still really good, useful. But maybe the sequel that isn't quite as good as the original for Postman is Technopoly.
Right.
But this book deals pretty significantly from there as well.
Yes.
So first of all, let me ask you this. What is a Technopoly?
Yeah.
And is it dangerous and can we avoid it?
Yeah, Technopoly was actually the first book I read of Postman, and it kind of made me like just a fanboy. And I read Amusing Ourselves to Death, I think, second. But it came out in 1992, I want to say, so a little bit after. So I think at that point, he was starting to see the digital revolution starting, computer technology, et cetera. And he's getting at this idea. So Technopoly, the word, basically means the tools of technology that we create to be utility, that we use for some purpose, they can eventually take on such a powerful place culturally that they end up using us.
Yeah.
Right? The tools we create to use end up using us, and we become subjects to the master of technology. We are oppressed, and the technology is the oppressor, right? So that's essentially the idea, and I think he's right on. Like the whole addictive dynamic of the head down, scrolling while we're walking around, shows you that we are in the weaker position. We are the oppressed. Like the tech companies are the oppressor. They've got us right where they want us, right? We're addicted. We can't stop scrolling. We can't stop clicking on the things that they want us to click on, which is money in their pockets. We are living in the matrix where we are hooked. There's dopamine rushes. It's Brave New World. We're just kind of entertaining ourselves to death, and money is being made in spades by those who have figured out how to keep us hooked. So that's the Technopoly idea.
Yeah. And is there avoiding it? I mean, so I don't remember which author, but he talks about somebody who tried to live like the Amish. And
the Amish come up a few times.
They come up a few times, right? And what I find fascinating there is that regardless of some of our misconceptions about the Amish, but anybody who tries to live like a Luddite, anybody who tries to live technology free, doesn't realize that that's just really not possible, right? You can try to limit your technology to that which you can stop it at the 18th century or the 15th century.
Right.
But if technology is just technique being applied to the created order, you're always going to be using technology all the time. So you can't escape it.
Right.
And then Postman has this other fascinating insight where he says, the problem with technology isn't even necessarily that it's malicious or dangerous, but that it's invisible. So that you live in a technopoly when you're not even aware of the technology that you're using all the time and how it rules you, you know?
Yeah.
I actually don't know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just
Well,
riffing.
you asked about is there a way to avoid the technopoly dynamic of being ruled by the technologies that you ostensibly control. Are they controlling you?
That's right.
And I mean, I think one kind of gut check question that we all have to ask is, can we go without it? Like that, I think that's always a good diagnostic question for anyone wondering if they're addicted to anything.
Yes.
Can you go a day without an alcohol drink?
Yes.
If you can't, you're addicted.
And don't just ask yourself that question in your head.
Yeah.
So I'm actually working with a guy right now to get him off pornography, right? And he's hopeful, he's optimistic.
Yeah.
I say, great, we're going to get Covenant Eyes on your phone. We're going to get it on your computer.
Right.
He says, yeah, I think this is going to be good. Texts me the next day and says, I'm an addict.
Yeah.
It's all I can think about. It's one thing to say, oh, I don't need to have a drink. It's another thing when you have your wine at 9 o'clock at night every night to actually say, I'm not going to have it. And then see how you do.
Yeah.
To actually put your phone away for 24 hours.
Yeah.
And then see what you feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I think it's good for us to kind of try those breaks and to see, like, is it possible for me to go an hour without my phone, a day, a week? Like, that would be hard. Like, I don't know if I could do that, but if we find it hard to do that, to go without something, then it shows that we are addicted, that the power dynamic is such that they have us where they want us and we can no longer live. And the reason why the Amish come up in the book a few times is because that is a viable option. Like, Amish people exist in the 21st century. They've found a way to do life, to flourish without smartphones. It's possible.
Most of the time.
It's possible, right? Like we sometimes think that we could never go back. We could never put the genie back in the bottle. Like, and it's not really a question of whether it's possible. It's whether we want to. Do we really want to? And that's what Anton Barbacay argues in his great book, A Web of Our Own Making, which is one of the better books on like critical evaluation of our technological age. It came out 2023, I think. But he's pretty strong in arguing that, like, we talk a lot. There's a lot of talk out there right now about, the woes of technology, the societal ills of social media and technology. And there's a lot of ink is being spilled. A lot of books are being published, like ours, on these kind of critical evaluations. But we don't really have the will to change. Like, if you look around, people aren't really making drastic changes in their life. Maybe they're doing like a kind of bourgeois digital detox where they like take their notebook to the beach and have an analog experience for a few hours, but then they go post a picture about it on social media.
Like,
and they're
me
back
not
to
having
their
an Instagram account on my phone is seen as revolutionary.
Yeah.
When it's really just it's literally the least I can do.
It's a small little tweak. And he argues that, like, if we're really going to solve the big problems that have arisen culturally, we have to have big radical solutions. And I don't know if his proposal is viable or not. I don't know. But it's worth kind of asking that hard question of, like, do we really have the will individually and societally to kind of reverse course with some of these things? Because just dialing things back in little ways isn't going to solve some of the bigger spiritual dynamics that we've been talking about, the kind of the main character syndrome of how technology makes us. That's a spiritual dynamic. That's an epistemological dynamic. It's not going to be solved by just having 1 hour less a week on social media. So the disembodied, all the things that go wrong when we live so much of our lives disembodied, disconnected from physical community, physical reality, the problems from that are not going to be solved by just having 1 hour a week in nature and the rest of our time, still on devices. So I think these are big questions. And can we escape the technopoly? Yes. Do we have the will to? I don't know.
Well, one day, probably soon, our AI overlords will take it away from us anyways, and the problem will be solved.
Right. Maybe we should just let AI solve all these problems for us.
There we go. Put in the prompt. You've mentioned a couple of resources other than amusing ourselves to death. Let's think of some other good resources people can check out besides scrolling ourselves to death, which they definitely need to get to help them think well about this. I'm thinking of Tony Reinke.
Yeah.
He just does such a good job of writing about technology, not from the tech pessimist or the tech optimist, but from the tech realist position.
Yeah.
Any other recommendations that you have?
Yeah, Samuel's book that you mentioned, Digital Liturgies, is really good. We had a book a few years ago at TGC that Sarah Zylstra edited called Social Sanity in an Insta World.
Yeah.
My book, The Wisdom Pyramid, self-plug.
It's very good. It's very good. I read it.
I'm trying to think what other good resources there are. Of course, Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation.
Yes.
What's been good about that book is he actually has pretty concrete policy proposals that are actually starting to be adopted. It's kind of that rare book that makes a real difference politically. You're seeing nations like Australia start to like institute bans for smartphones, social media under a certain age. And that's all kind of downstream from a really good book by Jonathan Haidt. So I think that's the direction I would love to see writing go in this genre of technology and human flourishing is like, what are some actual actionable to go back to action, right? And how awareness of a problem only goes so far. And if there's no action we can take, then is it worth it? So yeah, and that's why the last third of our book, we tried to be as practical as we could with like ways that we can, as the church, kind of respond to this. So I hope that there's writers who will take that task like Jonathan Haidt does of like proposing very specific things that states, nations can do on a policy level, but also individuals. Like Justin Whitmill Early's book, The Common Rule, Habits of the Household. Like he has some good suggestions that are very practical that families can institute in their own lives. So.
Ben Sass has some of those too in one of his books. I don't remember. But yeah, it seems like we're getting pockets of it. Yeah, pockets of solid advice. Well, brother, I have 2 more pages of notes, but there is no time. Read the book.
No time. Yeah.
Buy the book, read the book. When this episode releases, it will be available.
Yep.
So now it's time for the rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Good. Okay. Ready.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Favorite sitcom?
The Office.
Young Earth, Old Earth?
Old Earth.
Dever, Piper, Keller, Sproul, or John MacArthur, whose books would you like to be trapped with on an island? You could only have one set of books trapped on an island.
Keller. And I'm not just saying that because I'm representing TGC.
Yeah.
I think his writing is great, and there's some really enjoyable. He's like a C.S. Lewis in his writing style, which I love. Yeah.
Same question, but for sermons. Dever, Piper, Keller, Sproul, John MacArthur.
Piper.
Yeah. Lewis or Tolkien?
Lewis.
Favorite fiction?
Gilead by Marilyn Robinson.
Solid pick. Mountains or beach?
Mountains.
Champagne or wine?
Wine.
Did you see Andrew Spencer? Did you see that Matt Smethurst clipped Andrew Spencer's answer?
Yeah.
I'm Baptist.
I'm Baptist. Yeah, that was great.
Least favorite candy?
Least favorite candy. Oh, the like the dust that you like dip a little stick in.
Yeah. Fun dips.
Fun dips. My kids love that, but it's like pure artificial whatever. What I don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
But
do you like black licorice?
No, that's also low on my list.
All right.
Yeah.
Android or iPhone?
Oh, I mean, I have an iPhone, but like, yeah, I don't. It's like my own worst enemy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The Apple, I have this whole theory about the Apple, and the bite mark on the Apple is like symbolic of like how the iPhone is basically like original sin incarnate.
Let's all get actionable on this and get an Android.
Right.
Get a phone that sucks so bad
that
you won't be enslaved to it. Morning person or night owl?
Morning person.
Take a risk or play it safe?
Take a risk.
Bidet or toilet paper?
A toilet paper.
Dang, man, nobody's on the bidet train. That's crazy.
Are you?
Oh, heck yeah.
Okay.
Dude, a bidet? Come on.
Where do you find bidets? Like
Amazon, $20. Attach it to your toilet seat. Change your life, brother.
Of course.
Change your life.
Of course, Amazon has that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Which is another section in the book that we didn't talk about. But man, I think Ivan Mesa in his epilogue talks about how Amazon focused on not what was going to change in the next 20 years, but on what was going to remain the same. And therefore, we should do that. Don't focus so much on what's going to change. Focus on what is never going to change.
Wasn't that brilliant? I thought that was the perfect note to end on.
Yeah. I did too. Mayonnaise or mustard?
Neither.
Oh, okay.
I can't do condiments.
Yeah, we noticed from your Chick-fil-A chicken
you were
biscuit.
marked on that.
This dude ate a dry Chick-fil-A chicken biscuit for breakfast this morning. I thought I was going to have to do the Heimlich.
I'm generally a culinary adventurous guy, but I can't do condiments for some reason.
Okay. Text message or email?
Email.
Are you of the generation that if somebody calls you, you go like, what's happening?
No.
No, me neither. It is so weird though. I called somebody recently and they were like, is everything okay?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah.
It is become a weird dynamic. Like what rises to the level of a phone call?
Yeah. Night out or night in?
Night out.
Burger King or McDonald's?
McDonald's.
Mexican, Italian, or Asian?
Ooh. Italian, probably.
Football or basketball?
Love both, but football.
Burgers or barbecue?
Barbecue.
Chinese takeout or sushi?
Chinese takeout.
Cold or hot?
Just like weather, or
what would you rather be? Cold or hot?
Probably cold.
Rock or rap?
Rock.
Unibrow or no eyebrows? And you can't make any adjustments.
In me or my spouse or anyone?
Yeah, that is a good question.
To
like
look
for your
at
wife,
in others, or
no, for yourself. You have fair.
It's a lose-lose.
Fair hair.
Maybe maybe no eyebrows.
Oh, I was gonna say if you had a unibrow, it probably wouldn't be very perceptible.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you earlier, but I didn't, but I will now, about being a redhead and how like not having a soul, does that affect the way you think about all the content that we've been discussing?
Is that a thing about redheads?
That's the thing that they say.
Yeah, well, Helly on Severance is a redhead and her name is Hell.
Oh, come on. That doesn't bode well.
No.
Classical or jazz?
I love both, but I'll probably say classical.
Trapped on an island with one systematic theology?
Oh. Maybe Bavinck's The Wonderful Works of God.
Yeah, that gets mentioned a lot more than I would have expected it to. A lot of people say his kind of 3-volume set, but as a distillation,
it's just a very concise, like every sentence. It's just beautifully written. It's like the meatiest, but most enjoyable.
Yes.
Yeah.
What hymn do you want to be sung at your funeral?
Great is thy faithfulness.
Pretty quick answer. Mm-hmm. Last question, most important question. How many holes does a straw have?
Trick question. 2.
I'll give you time to think about it.
How many holes? 1.
1, right?
Yeah, 1.
Okay.
All
right. Let me pray. Lord, thank you so much for Brett and for the way that you shaped him, the experiences that you've given him, the discipleship that you've built into his life so that he sees the world and all the truth, beauty, and goodness therein, and understands it to be a reflection of you and your kingdom and the age to come. We pray that as it seems like he is even now ruthlessly clinging to the gospel as he engages with art and culture, that he'll continue to do that, Lord. Help him to remain steadfast as he continues to grow in sanctification. Allow him to even more consume only that which is useful and to avoid that which could be harmful. Help him to set his mind on the things that are worthy. Lord, we pray that you'll protect his heart as he endures criticism for the ministry that he carries out. Help him to remember that the only thing he really has to do is give an account to you on the last day, and let that create in him a kind of boldness and a fearlessness towards others. Because he fears you so much and because he so eagerly desires to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. Bless his ministry, Lord. We pray all this for the sake of the church and for the glory of your name. Amen.